Thank you to the Alliance for partnering with me. In terms of what you've found, what the Alliance has found, this interest in cooperatives, finding someone who has experience within and developing cooperatives, and especially in the food and farming sector, it does narrow down the pool to me. So I do want to introduce a little bit more about my experience there so that hopefully as we get beyond the introductory information, since you all are representing so many different interests, so that you can get an idea of the different areas of experience that I have, so we can have some follow-up conversations too. But just to say that, yeah, the world that that we're talking about of like worker cooperatives in farming and food is rather niche. But I have come to it as a San Diegan. I grew up in San Diego within the Vietnamese community. My favorite market is Viêng Dam on 54th and University. And growing up in that community of refugees, we lived cooperation in order to make a home in this new place together, right? In a place where none of our ancestors had lived before. And so in order to meet our needs, from finances to childcare to finding jobs, right? There was always acts of cooperation, and specifically financially lending circles, cooperative lending circles, where people would come together, pool money together so that someone could buy a car, someone could buy a house. That's how my parents bought a house, was a cooperative lending circle, because banks wouldn't lend to families like mine that didn't have a credit history, right? And then in terms of childcare, you know, my generation that was born here, a lot of our parents worked full-time jobs or multiple jobs, 3 jobs, and so working together to have the kids take care of each other, be our rolling tax through City Heights, and then also with some adult supervision, going in and out of nail salons and such. You know, there was coordination there, and those are the kinds of the spirit of cooperation that I brought with me to when I went to college and was looking for housing in the Bay Area, notoriously expensive, and found cooperative housing, and that was where large groups of teenagers owned a house together, and that's where I learned the technicalities of being in a cooperative, of delegating work, of really doing our bookkeeping. I was the work shift manager for a long time, so figuring out how 50 teenagers could keep a house clean, and paying our taxes and all of that. So the technical experience, as well as that of governance, right, of making decisions together, having our Sunday house meetings where we're talking about, how are we going to fix our roof? Or also when we're representing our house as a part of a larger set of cooperative houses, who's going to do that representation, and also in relation to the university, trying to leverage resources from the university. So the democratic decision-making process was just this lived experience in my house, right? And so that's when I could feel that upbringing of growing up in this Vietnamese community of cooperation, and then institutionalizing it through the formal policies that we had in this housing cooperative, and also seeing the ways in which cooperation was a basis for fun, right? Of collective energies, so that we could come together to create not just a living space physically and shelter, but also just a space for giant teenage parties where it's like, oh, well, if we all pool our money together, if everyone just puts in $2, 50 people, that's a lot of ice cream, right? Or also we had a hot tub, we had a roof deck. So the collective experience of then working together to make the world not just livable, but better was what came out of my co-op experience. So from there, I will just name some of the other experiences. This will be super brief about it. But I'd gone to grad school in Toronto and started up a worker cooperative and consumer cooperative restaurant. So we sourced from local farms, we were worker owners in the restaurant, and then also the customers were part of a membership that also had a say in our governance. And then I came back to the US and I started my own farm. I still farm. I've been running a farm business for 10 years now. It's up in Sebastopol, California. I grow heirloom grains. So when it comes to this understanding of the farmer's lived experience and bringing that to cooperatives, or just the farmer lived experience in running a business, I have that personal experience fighting climate change while trying to grow food. And then also, as a farmer who has tried to gain an economy of scale while still retaining my autonomy, right? Like sharing equipment with other farmers so that we're not all having to buy the $100,000 set of grain cleaning equipment. What if we all pool our money together and own shared equipment to process our grains and take that necessary step to get our food from the farm to table, right? So I have that experience, and then I also was the California Center for Cooperative Development co-op developer for food and farms, and so I increased my professional experience helping other cooperatives start food cooperatives, such as like food hubs that were, remember when that was a hot thing in like 2009 or something, you know, where farmers were bringing their produce together and then trying to serve, you know, regional areas, especially rural communities where there weren't a lot of grocery stores. The roads were windy and, you know, hard to aggregate products. So I worked with a lot of food hubs to convert to become worker cooperatives, and in one case a hybrid worker co-op and producer co-op. So the people who, we'll get into this, but the people who worked in it were a cooperative, and then the farmers who came together to bring the produce were a co-op. And I worked with a lot of immigrant farmers to bring their products together. These were called agricultural cooperatives. So they all had their independent farms, and then they came together in order to market their goods or process them, in the case of jujubes, sharing a dryer, and then also being able to take it from San Bernardino County to LA County. And then after that kind of more technical service business development of cooperatives, I started an organization called Minnow. It's an organization that focuses on securing farmland tenure for California's farmers of color while advancing indigenous sovereignty. So within that organization, what I worked on was helping farmers as worker owners of farms to own land. And we helped with the decision-making process, but also in partnership with others, helped fundraise to purchase land. At the same time, in terms of this advancing indigenous sovereignty piece, our organization helped draft legislation for the state of California to return state-owned land to indigenous tribes. Governor Newsom signed that in 2021. So that's the first piece of legislation that sets precedents for the state to return land to tribes. So that's this set of work where we see that land is the foundation for any of our governing and organizing to happen, right? Our autonomy, our ability to work together, to own what we produce, relies on our ability to actually have place, right? So that was my work with Minnow. I've since left Minnow and am now working on mostly projects with other farmers, still focusing on developing their democratic governance systems, some of them as nonprofits, some of them as worker cooperatives, but still very much in the cooperative ecosystem. So yeah, that's a very niche world that I live in of cooperatives. And so I wanted to give you that overview in case it touches on your work, knowing that you all come from different sectors and interests. But yeah, stepping back from all of that, I want to talk about why worker cooperatives are worth thinking about. It might seem niche, but it is such a valuable structure for us in terms of living our values. Right? It is a site where we can live our democratic values, that everybody has a say over their lives, right? That's like a core fundamental value that we share, right? Especially living in the US. And so it's a way that we can live it in our workplace and not just a term that we apply to our politics at large, right? And then I want to talk about the impacts of that, right? Why does that matter? And so when we say that, oh, there's a lot of water now. Thank you.
Make sure you have
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I interrupt just so Cynthia can introduce herself?
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, just Cynthia, do you mind introducing yourself? Everyone knows everyone in the room, so I would love for everyone to know you in the room.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cafe X by any means necessary. I'm Cynthia Johnny. I'm the co-owner of Cafe X. Mother, daughter, own, I'm the mother half. Welcome. Pretty much it.
Could you actually, this is perfect. Thank you so much for creating this space through cooperation. If it's not too much trouble, could you tell us why cooperative for you? And from the time that you conceived of it as a co-op, what have you seen as the benefits of it? Like, how has it played out for you?
Okay, so that's a long question.
Highlights.
Well, my daughter Kia, she was really the one who founded it. This is her brainchild, really. She developed this idea of a co-op, and with that design, with our cooperative agreement and all that, back in 2016, she was with Rice, San Diego. So she really wanted to create a place where we could do exactly what we're doing, where we could talk about, develop, and actually have actionable plans together to, kind of spread out and build community. It's all about building community. So we have all kinds of workers that come here to study and talk and strategize, and that was the whole purpose of the space. Aside from the fact that we're underrepresented in the coffee industry, and she wasn't even a coffee person. She was totally a tea person until we developed our own blend. You guys enjoying the coffee?
So good. Yeah. Oh yeah. Earlier, that was his first remark before introducing himself. He was like, "This coffee is great."
Yeah, we developed that while we were on COVID vacation in 2020. We're very picky about who we, collaborate with. They're fair trade, organic, all of that, making sure that their values align with ours. So, of course, San Diego Food Alliance is that perfect home and space and partner, and we love you. So the way that it's worked out has just been really a good way to meet people that are interested in co-op models, that are doing it, that are looking to develop more of them. So that's been a real plus, and just being out there and being able to connect with those people. As a for-profit and a nonprofit, you don't get that opportunity. It's not even, banks don't even think about us as a real anything, right? So how do we change the narrative on that, right? So strategizing in that vein, so that's really been the plus, is being able to reach those communities that are aligned with our mission and vision of cooperatives. So, does that answer the question?
That was all great. Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, just pulling out some of the key topics that you touched on that I want to highlight for our session today is just you talking about the importance of this place as one that has been able to open up to community as a physical space for people to be, but also that then you're modeling something that people are interested in, and then you're connecting them with those resources, right? resources that otherwise might turn away from people. So I do want to weave that in to what we'll talk about today, is just the connection between the worker cooperative business to the rest of the community, how worker cooperatives are a way to serve community when there are certain communities that have been marginalized, under-resourced, right? And then also that being a cooperative within itself, since that model is less of the status quo, right? What are the financial structures that do exist, institutions that do exist that can support cooperatives, how cooperatives are helping inform those institutions, right? Because business is also about money, so we do need to talk about that practicality. And that it starts though from a dream, right? And that it's the dream that welcomes people in is one that that grows quickly, and when it can be done inclusively is the strongest, right? So it's, yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I do find that often when people come to worker co-op sessions that I come to, maybe it's me, but there's a lot of interest in the community, the relational elements, and I do think that's incredibly important, and we'll touch on some of that today. But a lot of today's focus is really just trying to have this goal where you can step away understanding the basic definition and structure of a worker cooperative and how to start one up. So it is going to be a bit more technical, even though work co-ops are so much more than that. That's really what I want you all to come away from this workshop knowing, being secure in that these baseline information about the structure and technical startup processes. But yeah, before getting into that, I think it's still worth talking about and expanding on what was said of like why worker cooperatives, right? So we talked about there's the values, but what is the impact of that? Like, yes, it's important for people to govern themselves, but then how does that manifest? And what we've seen with worker cooperatives in existence for centuries now is that, one, when workers own the business, they usually live where they work, right? And so by doing that, they are circulating money into the local economy, right? They're purchasing for their business, right, services from nearby businesses. So that's engaging the local economy. But also as residents of that location, they're also purchasing from the local grocery stores, going to the local schools, participating in this local ecosystem that strengthens really this material world that we live in, right? As we shift towards the digital realm, apps, AI, right, there's still fundamentally the fact that we live in a material world. We still exist, right? And that there are ways that worker cooperatives are now providing digital services, but still this factor of the people who own the business, who are making decisions based on their locale and engaging those around them has been key to the robustness of local economies. So we see this in Madison, Wisconsin, in New York City, in the Bay Area, and these are regions that have been intensively studied in terms of the ways that cooperatives have contributed to the local economy and stabilized jobs in the face of even more recent extremes of the pandemic and climate catastrophes. And then we also understand in terms of the long-term view of worker co-op lifespan is that, so there was an international study done 10 years ago based in Denmark where this university studied worker cooperatives across the world and found that worker cooperatives have been able to weather economic downturns, major recessions such as the Great 2008 recession, they were the most adaptable, and they mostly survived compared to other businesses in the same sector as them, because the workers who know best, what are the areas of our business that we really need to hold on to, what are the areas that we can kind of skim and reduce in terms of our costs of production, and then also in terms of worker retention, right? Figuring out how people could have their salaries or compensation adjusted in a way that still respects what they need to have a livelihood, while also sustaining the workplace that is the source of their livelihood, right? And not placing them in a position of precarity, of unemployment, and then perhaps being able to hire them again in the future, but through a process that doesn't necessarily guarantee that they would have that job again, right? So there's the internal sustainability of a business being a worker cooperative, because it's the decisions are being made by the people who understand it best, rather than someone who maybe is profit motivated and is just going to cut whatever they think is necessary from their perspective, right? But something that might have the highest, the cost benefit analysis on the spreadsheet might actually just be a core part of that business, but then gets cut because of a profit motivation, right? For someone who is not deep in the work itself. So within the cooperative, it has to be more sustainable and adaptable, but then the impact on a regional ecosystem and economy, right, is actually sustaining that region more strongly than other types of businesses, especially extremely hierarchical ones. So that's the beauty of worker cooperatives in action, and why democracy is important, right? That the people who are the most affected make the decisions. We understand that on the political level, but on the business and economic level, that's how it's turned out in cooperatives. Okay, and then so now, what do we mean by cooperatives? Does anybody know a definition for cooperatives? Like, when you signed up for this workshop, did you Wikipedia cooperatives and try to find a definition? I would love to hear updates on what people see as a definition of a cooperative. And actually, there's a lot of new faces from last time. There was a previous workshop in October that was an introduction to cooperatives generally, and then I presented my definition, and I think there's only Jose from last time, which is good. So I'm wondering if anyone else has looked up the definition of a cooperative, or wants to take a gander, a guess as to how you would define a co-op.
I didn't look it up anywhere, but to me it sounds like it's more like collaborating with people, working with people, kind of negotiate, give and take, and everybody works towards the same goal, and it's all done, like you said, by everyone involved making decisions and respecting everybody's points of thought, and then maybe being able to agree on, not agree on something, but being able to move to do what's best for the overall team or whatever.
Yeah. Thanks, Jorge. Yeah, I appreciate you taking a guess at it. I think you hit a lot of the points. I hear a lot of the beginning part was the sort of people collaborating with some give and take. I'm like, that's you've got a long, happy marriage, it sounds like. But the key part is that you're working towards a common goal. And so I want to pull out, you have a common goal, and that in the collaboration that everyone is represented, like you said. You hit the main points. And then just differentiating that from community organizing, which is the background that I come from, right? Is like, how do you translate that into cooperative business? And so here, this is where I've developed my definition of a cooperative. The thing is, there's no single definition of a cooperative out there. There are 7 international cooperative principles that I'll go over, but that doesn't actually define a cooperative, and that also, from the IRS perspective, there is a designation for cooperatives, but that's what they're looking at are that you filed your articles of incorporation and that you have the correct tax designation and that there are at least 3 people on the board. That's about it, but that doesn't say like what is a cooperative. So what I want us to ground into, though Beryl, maybe you remember from last time, you were also there.
Well, I remember that you emphasized sort of the last element of it, which really triggered that it's a business.
Yes, exactly. So my definition is that a cooperative is, okay, and then for Beryl and Jose, you'll notice that there is a slight modification to my definition. So good thing you came today, right? Is that it's a democratically owned business that provides a service for its members at cost. Okay, so let's break it down. Okay, is a democratically owned. So democratically owned. That means the co-op, each member has 1 vote. You can structure a co-op to have like a representative democracy, the way that our country is a representative democracy, but everybody has a vote. Right? So it's democratically, and it's democratically owned. Democratically owned, and it's a business. So there are collectives out there, groups that organize democratically, but when we're, for the purposes of our conversation today, this workshop, and your interactions with the IRS and the state of California, it is a business, right? And it's great if people want to organize themselves cooperatively in other spheres, but we're talking about a business that provides a service. So going back to what Porter was saying is that there's a specific goal, there's a specific service, and with a worker cooperative is usually, the purpose is to provide employment for people to then do a certain kind of work, right? Or you'll have a producer cooperative where the purpose, say like for food sheds starting out, right? The purpose was to be able to, for farms to be able to aggregate their produce. That is the principal service being provided to the producer members, right? So there's a service. And again, that's differentiating from sort of the community and collective organizing spaces that we might be in. And even if you're not intentionally organizing, being in community, right, you can be providing a lot of services to each other, named or unnamed, but with a co-op, you're identifying at least one specific one. And you might develop others, but at least for the purpose of incorporating your business, for bringing people together, usually there's one sole service. And then part of this definition is for its members. So emphasizing that when we talk about this membership, right, it's a closed group of people. We'll get into how people can become members, but say we are a cooperative, we are a part of the membership, say of a co-op, Cafe X is a co-op. Anyway, so we're the members, and the co-op is supposed to serve us, not anybody outside. And this points to how in corporations, where there might be investors, shareholders, right, people who are not actually working within the business but have invested in it, they can have an outsized say in the governance of that business, right? So this is saying it's just us, right? We're not serving the needs of anyone else. It's just its members. And then when I say at cost, it's to say that the service is provided when we talk about a worker cooperative providing the service of a workplace, right? Doing so at cost is taking into consideration pay structures that the cooperative has developed. And that might include, just the regional cost of living. Some places have an equity fund that also is calculated into the salary. or dependent care fund, right? So anyway, those things are still at cost because you're considering what it takes to support someone to do work. And then differentiating from, going back to sort of some corporate models, right, where some people, depending on their position, might be paid 6 times more than or even more than that, than the lowest paid person at that company. But that is not necessarily at the cost of the operations. It is at an inflated value for different reasons, which is a whole other conversation. But so, going back to our definition for a cooperative, not specific to work co-ops, just a cooperative, is that it is a democratically owned business that provides a service for its members at cost. It's kind of long, but I think I nailed it. And just to be sure that you're following with me, I just want us to say it together, so that when you leave, you're like, at least I got this definition that nobody else has, except for other people who have attended my workshops. So a cooperative is a
democratic-run business that provides services for its members at cost.
Great, okay. So it's a democratically owned business that provides a service. Okay, and for its members at cost. Great. Okay.
Could you maybe expand a little bit on what do you mean at cost? I must have not been listening when you explained it.
Yeah, at cost, I think this one, it's like, I'm still workshopping this definition, so it's good to have the questions to dig into it. And it's, I think that part is most useful when we talk about, say, like consumer cooperatives or producer cooperatives. So OB People's Market is a consumer cooperative, right? So the membership customers, right, who opt to become a member, they pay membership dues. So the service that they're getting is that OB People's Market gets organic produce and no meat, right? And so people go there trusting that what is on the shelves is organic, well vetted, is good for them, right? And that when they purchase those products, that the price that they're paying for that product is at the cost that it takes to have purchased those items, to run the store, to keep the lights on, to pay the employees, right? And that it's not trying to mark up the items to then profit from those customers in an outsized way, right? Like where we see, so I'm in the grain industry, and seeing since the pandemic how people have just increased prices of wheat and flour because there's this conversation about inflation, but that's been an excuse for people to actually jack up the prices of products that they already paid for 10 years ago and have just been sitting on, right? It's without that relationship to the customers as a membership and that provision of a service at cost, they can increase the prices to the point where it's more about them creating this profit buffer than about what the customer experience is.
Is that like working at the break-even point?
Working at the break-even point? Well, also, I mean, co-ops will factor into like what you need to have in terms of savings, right? So for anyone who's been through like business planning or runs a business, right? Usually you have different buckets of savings where you're like, okay, we need to save this amount for emergencies, this amount for repairs. So you could count that as a kind of profit, but it's also a specific allocation, right? And that's usually designated and is a part of the democratic process of people having been a part of that budgeting and that transparency of, okay, what percentage of sales needs to go towards, or what is our fixed, goal for each year as a reserve, knowing that we'll need, we foresee these upcoming expenses.
Yeah, I have a question. When you mention from members at cost,
Mm-hmm.
is to who belongs to the cooperative, or we need to say be very specified. Let's say that I have a coffee shop and the owners, we own as a co-op. And then my son, my daughter that came, and that means that they're gonna have the same cost that I'm having, or I don't know, I don't understand that part.
Okay, and I think with the example that you're giving, I just want to understand, with this hypothetical cafe, is it a worker cooperative where all the workers are the owners of the business? Or is it a cooperative like the OB People's Co-op that we were talking about, where it's the people who shop there are the owners of the coffee shop? So for your scenario, which one is it?
The family, the first one.
The first one is that the people who own it. Yeah, so in terms of what's happening there is that they're going to be all compensated in a way that has been determined democratically by the cooperative. In terms of their purchasing of coffee, that's going to be different. Like you can have discounts, right? Starbucks has discounts for the employees or whatever, right? So that's not the at-cost part. The at-cost service that you're providing is the workplace.
Oh, okay.
So in terms of what you're compensating people is what's being considered in that calculation. Does that make sense?
Okay, yes, thank you.
Yeah. And then I think these questions are kind of leading, maybe I'm leading us as the facilitator, to the next part where I want to differentiate between, go into the deeper the difference between worker cooperatives and these producer or consumer cooperatives and the structure, and then we'll talk about the different ways that people will fit into it, and then the different systems that we're talking about in the business. But any other questions before I move on to that? Okay, so what's incredibly distinct about the worker co-op model is that the people who work there, they own the business, they have a say in how it's run and determining also salaries, benefits, all those things, right? And then when we talk about producer cooperatives, so for those of you who are coming to this workshop, maybe more from producer and Jose food sheds like this, or consumer cooperatives, that structure in some ways has a little bit more of a mirroring of our like hierarchical structures. So I'll go start there first. So who's been to OB People? Who's a member of OB People's Market? Oh wow, okay. Cool, no problem. So has anyone been a part of a food co-op?
Yes, Suncoast.
Suncoast, great.
Park Food Co-op, Park Slope.
Oh, Park Slope.
Yes, the oldest one.
Very famous. I still have never been there. And I've done a tour of food co-ops across the country, and I've got 60. Park Slope is not one of them, but there's a photo of me in front of all these food co-ops. Anyways, so the structure there is like when you're a shopper, you become a member, so you're a part owner of the grocery store. And what you do is you participate in annual elections where you elect board members. The board, for those of you who are familiar with nonprofit structures, it's very similar. You elect a board. The board then hires a general manager who usually then hires the staff. Maybe there's some mixing. Maybe the board is involved. Maybe there's a committee of the board that's also involved in hiring. And so then there's the staff for the grocery store. So if all of us were members of OB Peoples, when we go shop, the people who work there, they're not necessarily owners, right? And they were hired, and then through our process, democratic process, we're influencing the hiring process, but are not a part of it directly. Also to say that in that structure where you have members, board, and management, that for a producer or a food cooperative or a consumer cooperative, the members like don't have a say explicitly in that hiring and firing of other people, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Is Costco considered?
Nope.
No? No? You have to be a member to shop there.
You do have to,
It's
yeah.
usually
There's a lot of
people that-
co-optation of co-op language, membership, and things like that.
Democratically.
Yeah, it's not democratically owned. Yeah. So that as a member, you're not electing the board of Costco.
It is democratically charged.
That's it. Yeah.
REI.
REI is a co-op. Yeah, y'all are getting ahead of us because we are going to have a game of worker co-op or not. So we can save that. You're the guessing game. Well, actually, no. We could do some of that now. What are other co-ops that you know about? I'm pretty sure they will not be on my bingo chart, so feel free to bring it up. Yeah, name a co-op.
Cafe X.
Nice. Correct.
The cranberry company or something.
Cranberry Company. Yes, Sunkist.
Sun,
Yes, Sunkist. Ocean Spray.
Ocean.
Sunmade. Treetop. That apple juice. Cabot. Vermont.
Is King Arthur,
King Arthur is not. Okay, and thank you
but
for bringing it up.
but this is by employees. Oh, what is the difference?
Yes, thanks for bringing it up. Okay, so there's businesses where they say these things where you're like, is that cool? And so employee owned definitely comes up, and what they mean is that the employees own the profits. So employees don't actually own the business, but the profits. Yeah. I mean, there's this whole thing where Bob of Bob's Red Mill just passed away, and then people were like, "Oh, it's so great! He like didn't retain his profits. They were all shared by the employees." And I'm like, "Wow, they had to wait for him to die." I mean, rest in peace, Bob. But like, now they're getting their payout, of profits, and they don't have a say over the business, right? It's just the profits, and then they also don't have a say in when the payout happens. And that's something else that we want to talk about with worker cooperatives and like equity contributions and when you get your money back. Also like B Corp, not a cooperative. Collectives, not a cooperative. In California, if you have cooperative in your name, you have to be a cooperative. Unlike other states, so those of you from last time I remember, when I shared my story about how I went to Arizona and I looked up cooperatives and I was so excited to see like over 1,000 businesses listed as cooperatives. I'm like, dang, this is like a hidden gem state of cooperatives. And then it turns out that in that state you can incorporate and have your business name have cooperative in it, but oftentimes I just found like one person who like had a very big ego who wanted to have a cooperative, but it was not one. But in California, you actually have to be a cooperative to have that in your business name. Yeah. But other terms that I hear, yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know that about the cooperative term. So what about like the UC system, UC cooperative extension?
Okay, so UT cooperative extension used to actually do a lot of co-op development. There were more of me kind of people out there, and because that was a way, especially for farmers and people in rural areas, to have their services met. Like rural electric cooperatives are really big because electric companies had no profit incentive to set up power lines in rural areas, so people got together to build that infrastructure. And so UC cooperative extension and cooperative extensions across the country helped all of these rural farmers, the backbone of the country, to actually get the services that capitalism would have left them out of. Yeah.
There's that market at UCSD.
Is that?
That's the market at UCSD. That's a cooperative.
Oh, there is? Yeah.
And there's Shea Cafe and some other businesses related. I think UCSD has a good history of cooperatives.
It does. It definitely has that market. Shea Cafe has just gone through so many different iterations over the time since I grew up in San Diego. It's like, yeah, Punk Hub.
Is a credit union a co-op?
Yes, all credit unions are cooperatives. And then you also sometimes will see this little logo that says they're a part of the co-op system, such that you can use ATMs or get money from different credit unions, right? So like if you have a CalCoast Credit Union account, you could get one. You could get your money out at SDCC, or used to be. Now they're actually starting to split that up. But that's like the co-op network that they had amongst the credit unions that were.
So a union will be like a synonym for co-op?
Unions? Non-unions.
Not really.
No, yeah. So credit unions, yes. Unions on their own, no. There are union cooperatives out there. Cincinnati has a large steel manufacturing union cooperative. But unions, when you're talking about labor organizing, right, is that unions are the relations of the workers to a boss. Whereas in a worker co-op, there's no boss, or everybody's a boss. However you want to look at it, but it's not like the workers are trying to stake their rights, in kind of counter to a boss, right? So, yeah, for worker co-ops is all this stuff. All of our swag is like about like no boss and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Is a co-op and a nonprofit kind of like similar, or are there, what is the advantages of? Is there any like tax advantages, that type of thing for a co-op?
I love your questions. Okay. Okay, so very helpful to dig into nonprofits and cooperatives. So the cooperative is a democratically owned business. Yeah, okay. So, and that's different than a nonprofit, which is not a business entity. It's a public benefit entity. And so nonprofits can be governed in the way that a worker cooperative is. So, so democratically run. So the organization that I started, Minnow, that is a democratically run organization. So unlike many nonprofits out there, for us, we were all co-directors, and we made decisions by consensus, and we'll get into that, the different decision-making processes that you might have in terms of democracy, right? Because democracy can play out many different ways. So for a nonprofit, you can have a worker cooperative structure in it, but if you incorporate it as a nonprofit, then you're not taxed as a cooperative. Cooperatives are taxed as businesses, right? So you cannot receive like public dollars and write that off. It would count as income that then you are taxed on, right? Yeah. So great question.
They don't have tax breaks or anything?
Okay, so we will get into that. Okay, so this first section, I want to focus on this sort of like, what is a co-op definition-wise, and then get into these sort of values and principles that are shared, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of like, how do you start it up? Where does the money come from? Where does your money go? Yeah, but I think just maybe the quick version before we get deeper into it is that for different types of, so overall, their co-ops are taxed differently and oftentimes less than other for-profit businesses. And then there's also the difference between, since this is a worker co-op workshop, I will not talk about the tax breakdown for like the consumer or producer kind, but for a worker cooperative, you can have the internal structure of the cooperative can determine when people are taxed as well. So because when you're working in the co-op, there is your compensation in terms of maybe wages or salary, right? And you're taxed on the individual level, right? Because you're being paid to do your work. Then there's also the value, the dollar value that you're contributing to the cooperative. And so usually there's an equity account. That's something, well, I'm really getting into it already. Anyways, but there's like another fund, short of it is that there's another fund within the cooperative that's tied to each worker. And so there can be flexibility in the determination of when those payouts happen in consideration of taxation, right? And so we'll get into that and the technicalities and how that can work for people's benefits. And oftentimes people will be like, oh, I'd rather have more of my compensation go to my equity contribution, because it's like I just need this much to live off of. But if I could keep it there, it's sort of like a bank account that then I don't get taxed on it and I can take it out at a better time. Yeah. So, stepping out of those details. Okay, we're at 11. We wanted to have lunch at noon. Okay, so we have an hour. And what I had wanted to go through were grounding into the cooperative values. So these are shared across all cooperatives. And again, you know how earlier I was talking about how, you know, cooperatives embody our democratic values, and then how we implement it is through how we work together, right? And so I want to connect our cooperative values, what has been internationally accepted as these shared values, and then from there link them to the principles, which are how we live those values. And I want to highlight that there's a lot of concern or attention in cooperatives to this link between our ideas and then what we do. Because that disconnect, right, that disconnect is where distrust happens, right? That's where disillusionment happens. And we see in trying to develop a cooperative ecosystem like the Alliance is doing, we're in a context where democracy is associated with our country that has unevenly applied our laws, right, to different people based on race, gender, right, where they live. And that selective application of democracy and our laws has built a lot of distrust in our system, in these purported values that we have. And so within cooperatives, it's a chance for us to actually follow through. And so the systems of accountability that we have, of ensuring that we are connecting our actions to our values, is a core part of this process that I think I was reminded of when Jorge brought up his idea of this give and take towards a common purpose, but also the collaboration there. That part of the collaboration is that holding each other accountable to what we said was our common cause, right? And so here we'll go over the values that are part of getting us to that common cause. I think I'll use this board. Does anyone want to volunteer to write? Not you. To give you a sense. And then after this, we're gonna get to our game of working co-op or not. This is not a thing that I can hang stuff up.
I can volunteer.
I think I actually need 2 volunteers. I need one to hold it. Who's got some really good biceps and triceps?
I can hold it.
Great. I mean, you got 2 little kids, so that's constantly that's some work right there. Yeah. Who wants to huff some Sharpie?
Connie and Ellie got.
Okay.
I call it.
All right.
I will do my best. I can wait.
Okay. Values. We've got 6 of them. It's funny because then there's 7 co-op principles. So some overlap. Okay. Value number 1. Self-help.
Self-help?
Yeah.
With a dash or no dash?
With a dash. Self-help credit union, Fairmount and University co-op. Self-responsibility.
Also a dash?
Yes.
Okay.
And when they develop these international principles, they do it in an international forum. And I imagine when it's like talking with like Scandinavians or Germans or, yeah, they're just like, I don't know, we do this too. So okay, we've got self-responsibility, democracy. You got that one?
The third?
Third is democracy.
Okay.
Okay. And then equality. And there's two more after that.
Okay.
Okay, equity. Okay, and solidarity. Hey, thank you. Connie, I think you're relieved unless you want to switch with elementary pulling it up. Thank you.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Okay, so again, values. For any of you have any of you been through one of those like vision, mission, values processes? Some? No? Okay. So there are these. Yeah, so you all have, yeah. And so values, how are values defined in your training, in your work? Like values as distinct from vision or mission?
I don't think we got into the values actually. We did establish our vision and vision.
Okay, so yeah, so how would you define the vision compared to the mission?
I know one's a little bit more goal oriented.
One's more goal oriented? Yeah.
Yeah, like the mission, I think it's more like what you do, and the vision is where you would like to be in the future doing that, doing the mission.
Great. Project manager for the win. Great. Yeah. So just repeating back what I heard you say is the mission is what you're doing, and the vision is what you're doing it for, sort of like what it's going to be a part of as a bigger picture. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So.
And the values may be, I'm sorry.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. Tell me.
or like how you are going to do that, like your pillars, yeah, how everyone on the organization will have to behave or to do while doing the mission.
Exactly. Yes. Perfect. Okay. So just for everybody to hear, the mission is what you're doing, right? Your purpose. So when we talk about going back to our definition, a cooperative is a democratically owned business that provides a service. So that service is your mission, right? And the vision that we have is to be democratically owned, and that the value are how you get there, right? How you're enacting your mission. So here, when we see self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, solidarity, these are the way. This is what guides all cooperatives in terms of going for their mission, providing that service. So when we say self-help, what we mean is that while co-ops are geared towards creating a community where every member benefits equitably, ideally members need to help themselves while helping others. And this relates to the self-responsibility one, which is that much of the cooperative ideology is based on the idea that each individual member is individually responsible within the group. They should be responsible and play their part on their own without the need for external motivation or incentive. Which is to say, nobody's going to be your parent. That people in a cooperative, it's very important to know why you care about that mission, why you're connected to it, and to be motivated to work in relation to that, right, for that common good. And that in terms of relating back to the self-help is that the idea of the self is both as an individual within the cooperative, but that the self also, the cooperative as a kind of body, as a self, right, is that when you make individual decisions, it's also, it should be keeping in mind the benefit of the body of that cooperative. So connecting to say like how we vote, right? There's voting where people are just like, I'm gonna vote so that I can have this personal benefit from restricting these views. I guess I'm actually gonna give away my political stance here, which is that, you know, like in terms of like height limits of buildings, right? Some people might be like, oh, I really don't want anybody to be blocking my view of the beach. But we recognize that at this time in our society of climate change, where especially in the US, we consume 40% of the world's resources, and densification is actually a really critical way that we can reduce our climate impacts, voting in a way that's beyond thinking about the view of the ocean that you might individually have, but think about the view that we want to have an ocean there at all, and densifying, right, is a way that we would make decisions, right? So the idea of this self-help is like, how do we vote, how do we make decisions, govern our organizations with the body of the self being the group, not just the individual parts, right? And so that relates to democracy. So the democratic structure is critical to running a successful cooperative, where members have control. No one individual holds power over others, and members, they each have one vote, but we can also choose representatives. So with this, this little part about how no one person or group of people should have more power than others. This is an incredibly rich area to get into. Like, how do we do that when we self-organize? Because what I have seen is that people bring the patterns, the systems that they've already been living in, and bringing that into this space that they're trying to create something new. But unfortunately, what we have is what we've already learned, what we've seen modeled, and what we've largely seen modeled is not everybody being equal in power, right? And so here, it's not just a workshop. This is the stuff that I spend like years with co-ops doing, is actualizing the equality and equity that's needed for democracy to happen. It takes a lot of internal work, and a lot of recognizing the systems that we've learned, systems of oppression of others, but also the ways that we've internalized oppression of ourselves, and how that is different for different people, and that the co-op is an opportunity for us to learn with each other in an everyday practice that makes us better people, if you're open to it. There's also co-ops where people just get stuck in their ways, and then that is the story that we can get into later about what works and what doesn't for co-ops. But so, in order to manifest these values of democracy, we need equality. That is that everybody has equal benefits, and then equity. In the international definition, I'd say that it's less than, it's not quite akin to the way that equity is used in the social justice movements nowadays. And then also, this one is not referring to the financial equity that we'll talk about later in the technicalities, but that this equity from the international co-op perspective is that cooperative organizations should treat all members fairly without any form of discrimination. Equity is essential to creating a harmonious relationship between all members. I think we know, though, that treating all members fairly is insufficient, right? That is more so in the realm of equality, but for equity to happen is that we actually need to do the work of repair, of understanding what harms have been done and are continued, and how do we compensate for that so that people can be equal, right? And then solidarity, which is that members within a cooperative form a unified organization where all the individuals support one another. And each organization also supports other cooperatives to form a united network. So this actually kind of just comes back around to this idea of self-help, how the self relates to solidarity, and that the work that we're doing of equality and equity, of unlearning, and then building new systems within ourselves and amongst each other, right, is something that we practice within the cooperative and try to share as a community of practice with other groups. So yeah, these are the 6 values. Any questions? Please ask a lot of questions so I can drink a lot of water.
I guess, I don't know if it's kind of related to it, but kind of wanted to find out if you've done any type of like research or work on, what type of like core values should, work better in a cooperative as far as like, members, should they all have the same type of core values, or does it matter if they all have different, or if you got any comments on that?
Yeah, so just confirming what I'm hearing is that does it matter that co-ops might have different values, or is it beneficial that they have the same values? Is that
Not necessarily cooperative, but the group.
Oh, the group.
Yeah, the people, individual for that is what I'm kind of like.
Yes. Yes. Is it important that the individuals in a group share these values?
Yeah.
From my experience of working with different groups, I'd say absolutely. Like, the mission is something that you can always point to, and it's usually very clear, like, we're running this cafe, But how you get there makes all the difference, right? And we see that, just going back to the example of climate change, there's so many different ways that people are thinking about this mission of how do we tackle climate change, but how we're getting there is very much informed by our values. Some people are like, well, we still want some profit, so we're gonna create this product that still produces waste, but maybe less waste, or whatever, right? And like, the solution is through maybe technologies or new products, right? Some people's values is like, how do we work with what we have in our traditional knowledge and do this work of equity to address climate change, right? And that core set of values that the solutions to climate change are from the people, not from technologies, that's gonna really influence the kinds of solutions that you're gonna present, right? Or how you do things. And so later on we'll talk about, so what I'd like for us to do is move through this, understanding the definition and overall structure of worker cooperatives, and then move into talking about the technicalities of like incorporation and all of that, and then talk about like the human needs. And so we'll get more into those values and the shared values and what else a group needs in order to be successful. But yeah, having the shared values is really essential, because if you have really different ways of how you want to get there, that also informs like what different jobs you're going to create within the co-op and what qualities you're going to look for in hiring candidates who then become worker owners, right? So again, I think you just bring up a really great point about this work, the broader work that worker cooperatives are trying to do, which is how do we connect our purpose, our values to the work and be accountable to it and be consistent to it in a way that helps us move together effectively to that common cause, right? Yeah.
I'm curious because this is the idealism, the ideal situation, but I've witnessed things where they can go wrong. There's corruptions, there's inflated egos, there's toxic environment, and I've seen this in bad situations. Can you give me an example of what is vulnerable in each case? What would be what you have to look out for, watch out for?
Yeah, I think that's a really important area to get into, and in seeing the registration questions, I think a lot of people were like, okay, worker co-op's a great idea, but like, what are the pitfalls? Like, why don't we see more of them? Or, why do they fall apart? So I do want to get into that. I want to do that in the section later where we get more into the interpersonal, just like, what does it take? But so will you do me a favor and hold on to that question and be sure to bring it up for me later? Thank you. I'm wondering, is it possible to close that door and maybe open that door since just not a very loud person. Oh, okay. I will try to be a louder person. Oh, that even makes the big difference, even if it's like.
Sorry, they can't go all the way around.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. All right. So now let's go. Any other questions on? Any clarifying questions about what these values mean?
I have a question. Like, I don't know if cooperatives will be like a medium for developing other kinds of organization forms, because, like you said, like there are no bosses, right? But there are leaders. Starts the project, or when the democracy is over, or the cooperative is over. Because, yeah, that means if there is no more democracy, that means that there is no more cooperative.
That's right. Yeah. If it's not democratic, then it's not a cooperative. And also, the technicality, cooperative businesses have to have at least 3 people. If you just have 2 people, it's not really a democracy. It's just 2 people talking to each other. And obviously, if it's 1 person, it's not a cooperative. So you need 3 people, and then it does need to be democratic. Which is to say, each person has 1 vote. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. I'm going to populate it there.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, well, yeah. Let me know when you have a different version of it. Hope you all be able to answer it better.
So, would you recommend a cooperative adopt these values?
Formally, so you can reference it. Yeah, I think that's very helpful. And I think what I often see people do is they put it in their own terms, so that it's meaningful to them or their communities, so that their communities understand what it means. I've also seen where people like write out the values and then have like different arenas for like, this is what it looks like for us to do this, right? It's one thing to describe a concept, and then they might talk about how that's implemented, which is why there's these principles that we will get into now. How are you doing with holding that up? Is this a post-it? Yeah. Okay. Is there, maybe we could put it over there. Oh yeah, actually, Sona, if you could take this one, we'll swap out, and then just post that one up.
Oh, you good?
Okay. Okay. All right. So now we're going to get into the manifestation of these values through principles. You don't necessarily have to do this for your organization or business, right? To go beyond values to principles, but for people that I've worked with, largely people do find it helpful to go through the process of identifying their vision, their collective vision, like what is the world we want to live in, what is our mission, how are we specifically getting our world towards that vision, values, how are we together specifically going to get there, and then the principles are, okay, these are manifestations of our values, how we're going to do it, right? And so international cooperative principles were developed in the 1800s by the Rochdale Collective, and they ran a store. But since then, it's over and over again, people have grounded into these principles and finding that they haven't changed, that these are the principles that have helped cooperatives build ecosystems and then also, ecosystems that don't necessarily include other cooperatives, but also in cooperative relations. So, Connie, do you mind doing this again? I actually am not as good at multitasking as I thought I was. Yeah. Okay. Ooh, and I will take this chance to sit down. All right. Okay. So, number 1, voluntary and open membership.
How many are there?
7.
Okay.
Which is just funny because there's 6 values and then there's 7 principles, and the principles are intended to be the practices of the values. So I'm like, okay, shouldn't there be 6 then? But there's 7. Okay, so voluntary and open membership, and then democratic member control. Okay, members' economic participation. Autonomy and independence. Oops. So I remember when I made that that really nice infographic version of this for Pishka. Yeah, my got crushed in the garage collapse of 2024. All right. Education, training, and information. Oh, yeah. I think you're right. I think it's at an angle, but I could recreate it from that, yeah. Maybe I could keep it in the Alliance office. Yeah, on the upper floor. 6 is cooperation amongst cooperatives, among cooperatives.
Cooperation amongst cooperatives.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, great.
One for both of them, so that you have.
I do feel that brain shrinkage, you know. Yeah. And then concern for community. Okay, thank you. That is all. Okay, so voluntary and open membership. Okay, this relates to the value of democracy and inclusion. So voluntary and open membership is that, it's just to say that co-ops don't discriminate based on religion, race, gender, sexuality, right? And I also want to make the distinction that just because a co-op doesn't discern based on those arenas, it's still a democratically owned business, yeah, and it's providing a right. And so, as a business with a particular service, as for a worker cooperative, that membership is still going to be defined by the business and the service, right? So, the members of a worker cooperative are the workers, and so the workers need to meet the job descriptions, the needs of the business to do its work, right? So this is to say you would still discern people for hiring purposes based on the job, but not based on other, personal, religion, race, all those other sort of identities, right? So that's a pretty straightforward modern day HR perspective. Any questions on that one? Okay. Democratic member control. So we've talked about this before, again, relating to the value of democracy. Each member has one vote. And in terms of democratic member control, there are other functions. We talk about how in order for that structure to work successfully, the co-op needs to focus on communication and engagement. And we think back to the founding of our country and our Constitution and amendments, and the reason why freedom of speech is our First Amendment right. It's about ensuring communication. Democracy cannot work without communication. That's why we have a free postal service, right? That was to distribute information so that everybody could be equal in being informed. And an uninformed democracy is not a democracy. You're going to have differences in power if not everybody has the same information, right? So when we talk about this principle of democratic member control, there's this like subline that within the co-op world, we know that this means that in order for this to happen, it's about having clear structures of communication and accountability so that people can engage in democracy. I don't know, I'll just like update this, or I don't know, it might be tricky, but it is sort of like a wink wink to people who like already are in cooperatives of like, oh yeah, democratic member control, you're talking about meetings. And then how you act upon those meetings, right? And member economic participation. This goes back to how cooperatives are a business, right? Not just a collective of people, right? And that there needs to be this investment, the economic participation, invest in a worker cooperative, investment into it through usually like startup funds or member equity contribution, which we'll get into later, but also through the economic participation of doing the work, right? And that's key, because if you're not vested in the purpose, then there's no reason for you to be there. And then also, depending on how much people work in it, there are differences in how much return they get from the cooperative as well. Let's see. Anything else on that front that I want to show? Nope. Okay. Autonomy and independence. So this goes to the values of self-help and self-responsibility. This idea of autonomy and independence, when this comes up, people are like, wait, but it's a cooperative, so how is it also autonomous and independent? But the cooperative, by being an entity where its members own it and are participating in the economics of it and the governance of it, that enables it to be autonomous from others, right? Like when we were talking about the shareholder structure, right? Rather than being dependent on other people's funds to operate and thus being beholden to what their decisions are that don't necessarily reflect the needs of the cooperative, breaking free of that allows for that autonomy and independence. Does that make sense? Any questions there? All right. And then education, training, and information. This goes back to the wink-wink part of the democratic member control, but the education, training, and information is another level, which is, it's not just the information that you need to make decisions within the cooperative, it's the education and training to be an active participant in cooperative governance. Oftentimes, the social skills that we need to work with each other, we can try to practice it, but sometimes it's helpful to just step out of that and go through a training session together or have some readings together to think about how are we making these decisions? Am I showing up in a way that's helpful? And the social process is one that it's not fixed, right? It's not like we learned how to make friends once in kindergarten and that's the same model where you use to make friends for the rest of your life, right? That there's all these different relationships and it's dynamic. And so how we learn to relate to each other and work together and make decisions with each other is also dynamic. So continuing to make time for education training for the cooperative is a key part to the group growing together. Yeah, and this part I find is something that people forget about. We talk about like professional development. Maybe some groups have like a fund for that for employees. but doing it as a group and doing it about not just management issues like their operations, but doing it about governance is really key. And when groups have troubles, usually what they find is like, oh, we needed to do some of this education and training together. Okay. Then cooperation amongst cooperatives, and that's a value that it sounds straightforward or kind of a given, like, okay, you're already a cooperative, you want to cooperate with others, but this is in such stark contrast to the global model that we see of how businesses relate to each other, that are very proprietary, very competitive, and that whatever you develop is your own, and that's, you know, not something that anyone can ever know about. But cooperation amongst cooperatives, it's how we learn about how to govern together. It's also about the technicalities of, for bakeries, we talked about Arizmendi, right? That bakery model where these worker co-op bakeries in the Bay, they have helped other cooperative bakeries start up as far as even sending their own staff members to be paid to like help train new bakers for a new startup bakery, right? So that cooperation amongst cooperatives say like, hey, we've got our business, it's doing great, we want to help you be your own autonomous group and thrive based on like how you envision governing yourselves. Right? And then the last is concern for community. So just circling back to what I had shared at the beginning of like, the impact of worker cooperatives on our economies is that the people who are working in them usually live within the place that they work. And so there is this weaving in of the concern for community for the manufacturing worker cooperatives, recognizing that what they produce is going to impact their environment. Are they going to use eco-friendly products, or are they going to use things that are causing contaminations into the streams and lands that their own children play on, right? So there's concern for community in terms of the work impact, but also the relations, the community relations that the co-op is situated in. Those are principles. All right, any questions? No. Okay, great. So these interact with each other, and so as you think about not just cooperative businesses, but even interacting cooperatively, interacting in the cooperative that is our broader society, I hope that these values and principles help ground, just what you might want to practice even if you aren't formally starting a cooperative, right? These are values that I think speak to what we all want to live in some way or another. So that's the co-op ethos. And now that you've had this overview of the structure of cooperatives, definition, values, principles, yeah, I think it's easiest to come around that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry. When you were talking about membership, economic participation, it was not just investment. It could be your time, your work, everything. So how do you get control of how many hours you besides the investment you do, the amount of hours you work for it, how you control versus, let's see, like a co-op that has been starting a year before and versus a new member that will have the same amount of investment and versus the hours that the previous members has been working. So how manage that?
Oh yes. So co-ops account for that, and to confirm my understanding that others heard it, I think the question is like, how do you account for the work and time, effort that people have put into maybe if the co-op has existed for a year already? How do you differentiate between how much value those people have accrued versus someone who's coming in new? And there is a difference, and that's what the member share or member equity account accounts for. And this is also why it's important to have a really good CPA, a really good accountant who understands cooperatives, or at least a CPA to help set up the initial tracking, the spreadsheet or what other bookkeeping that you're using, so that you are tracking the member contributions over time. Yeah. Yeah. We'll get more into that in the technical section. Stay tuned, post lunch.
Thanks.
But yeah, generally, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, it is very important, and that's key part of manifesting the values of equity.
Yeah.
Not just not just financially, but also in our social relational ways. Okay. All right. Now it's time for a test. Yay! Not a quiz. It's a game. It's a game. It's a game.
Game sounds much better.
Game sounds much better. I mean, I think well, yeah. I'm one of those kids who really love taking standardized tests. Like, if I heard of one happening, I'd be like, oh, can I not go to this class so I can take the standardized test? So, the test to me sounds really fun. Yeah. I'm in a niche world throughout my whole life, yeah. Not just co-op. Okay, what I'd like you to do is work maybe in pairs. And what we're going to do is you'll read through these different mission statements and then indicate if you think it's a worker cooperative or not. Yeah, read it. I think that's fine. Okay, everybody, let's gather back together. And I'm sure you want to know the answers. All right. If you can hear my voice, clap once. If you can hear my voice, clap twice. If you can hear my voice, clap 3 times. I only did it twice. Great, thank you. So what we'll do now is go through each one, and I'll just ask you all what you thought, and then I'll tell you a bit more about the cooperative. So the first one, where did I leave that giant stack of? There it is. Okay. So first one, and I did doctor them so that it removed the words cooperative, or if it was there, or what kind of cooperative. So if it looked a little funny, that's probably because of my bad surgery. But so the first one is, we're a unique automation equipment manufacturer. Every employee who designs and builds your equipment has a vested interest in the success of your project. Okay, so hands up for yes, worker cooperative. Nobody. Okay, so hands up for not a worker cooperative. Okay, everybody. Okay. And so what do you? They're an automation equipment manufacturer. That's what they do. So nobody said they're work prop, but it actually is. Yes.
No, I just the word vested. So
vested.
Vested.
Yeah, I know. It's a good wink. All right. So this is for Isthmus Engineering. They're based in Madison, Wisconsin. What they do is they manufacture machines that build machines. So when I went to visit them, they were working on a machine that built the machine that makes mousetraps.
Oh, mousetraps.
Yeah. So right, it's like they're not building the mousetraps themselves. They're making the machines that then make a machine that's a company that makes mousetraps then would use. Right? And as an engineering cooperative, what they do is they do have senior engineers, junior engineers. They're all worker owners. They all own that engineering company. As workers, they also have this interesting arrangement where for their projects, right, in engineering, what's unique about that industry is that it's very project-based, so there's a specific timeline you have a client, right? And so what they'll do is they'll actually rearrange who is the project manager for a particular project, and they get paid more than maybe another engineer who has a different role in that project. And they might have the same skill level, but as I was talking to some of the worker owners, they're like, oh, it's great because like for me, I take my vacations with my families in the summer. That guy, he takes his vacations in the fall, and so if it's a fall project, you know, he wants less work. And it's just like, just tell me what to do and I'll do the drafting or whatever. And then in the summer, that other person's like, yeah, I want less work. I'll get paid less, but I get to go spend time with my family, right? So within a sector that is very much associated with like strict hierarchies or like a very fixed arrangement of people with their specific roles, it's great to see that Isthmus Engineering, they're very flexible and they use their worker ownership to adapt to each individual and account for individual like family needs, lifestyle, and still do amazing work. And I also like to point out that in terms of their collective concern for community is they also have this policy for their company that they do not take on any military contracts. And so it's a fascinating, just like sort of to be like, oh, this is the way that engineers who, you know, we might have our stereotypes of how they are in their personalities, right? The rigidity or maybe apolitical, right? But that it's the way of coming together that they also can still express their values in an industry that is, you know, very, very important for manufacturing and, yeah, where so much money comes from military that they made that decision together is a really big deal as for an engineering firm.
Isthmus, you said?
Isthmus, yeah, because they're on an isthmus. Very literal in a lot of ways, those guys. Yeah, they're mostly guys, I think, all except for me. All right, the next one. We were founded in 1985 to provide quality home care to clients by providing quality jobs for direct care workers. Okay, worker cooperative, yes or no? Yes. Worker cooperative, no. Okay. All right, so this is a home care cooperative, right? It's people who provide quality home care. And folks, this is a worker cooperative. They are based in the Bronx of New York. Oh wait,
You said it was a cooperative, right?
Yes.
you said it was cooperative. Oh, but then as a group,
They said
they said no. Democracy at work. Okay. Well, yeah. So you're correct that it is a worker cooperative, and it's one that now has 1,600 worker owners.
1,600.
Yeah, and they provide home care in the Bronx. It's mostly women, many of whom are immigrant women, immigrant refugees. They do trainings for about 600 new potential worker owners every year. What I find really incredible about their work is that they're so big and that the investment of each person is very present. I've only met maybe 50 of them, so that's not a large portion of their whole membership. But in having met them, like they've created a great community for governance, but also community amongst each other. Like I had gone to one of their like evening markets where a lot of these women have also created crafts, and then they created a space so that they could sell the crafts in one of the offices of the home care offices, so they also have their supplies, right? So we think about how the cooperative provides a service for its members, so that's the workplace. But at the same time, once you bring people together, you can activate other ways that people share spaces, community, and what they want to do together. And what they're being paid, also, I'm hearing from these women that they've been able to save up to actually like buy a house, or a condo in New York, right? So people who did not think that was possible, being able through the process of equity and also just getting more experience with doing the paperwork and bureaucracy, that's also what I've heard has been a great benefit. For people who, if on your own you had to face all of the filings and taxes on your own, the learning curve there is quite high, right? And that there's not a lot of services necessarily to help everybody from different cultural and linguistic backgrounds to navigate those forms of bureaucracy. But by having a cooperative that normalizes education and training, transparency, sharing, that people gain more experience and a sense of confidence to then engage in those in the kind of paperwork that then is involved in home purchases or starting their own businesses, and yeah, getting the kids. So it's noon. Okay, we will wrap up very soon. Okay, the next one is we are a bakery that values social justice and local community. With a mindfulness for natural resources, we provide quality, affordable foods and create a democratic, supportive workspace. Is it a worker cooperative? Yes?
Sounds like it sounds.
We say yes.
So those are some for sure yes, or I saw some hands up. Others I see a little bit of like sprout retraction. Okay, so this one is also a worker cooperative. This is Arizmendi Valencia. It is, yes it is. Yeah, so Arizmendi Valencia, their full statement is, we are a worker-owned bakery that values social justice and local community, et cetera, while providing workers with a sustainable living and ongoing skill development. We model and support alternative economies and cooperative ownership. Okay. And the what I had shared previously in our earlier workshop, directed at you all, Panipaus, was sharing the story of Arizmendi Bakery, which is that it actually started through the Cheese Board Collective. Where's Ellie? Okay. I brought this up last time, and Cheese Board Collective is in Berkeley, and Ellie went to Berkeley, and she's like, I had never eaten there before. I'm like, that place has been around since like 1973. But yeah, so this Cheese Board Pizza started as a collective, became a cooperative, and if you can go there, they make really delicious pizzas. They also have a cheese shop with the pizza. They just make one kind of pizza every day, and you just wait in a super long line, and then you tell them if you want a slice, a half, or a whole, and if you want it half baked or fully baked. And they were super successful in supporting the livelihoods of bakers, which is really challenging. Baking, food industry, right, it's a very low wage kind of sector. But they created this cooperative to support a living wage for bakers in the Bay Area. And with their success, some of the members wanted to create another bakery in a different part of the Bay Area. And so, as I mentioned before, is that they sent over some of the workers from the Cheese Board to then help start up the other bakery. So there's a 6-month period of helping them, helping the newer bakers learn not just how to bake, but also be a part of governance and the democratic decision-making process. The way they've since founded is the Arizmendi Foundation, which coordinates that kind of replication of the cooperatives. And I think this is just such an important model to take note of, is this idea of the cooperatives amongst cooperatives as a way for us to attain scale, to get big, without it just being one group getting really big, right? And I think in the realm of farming, that is so key. For those of you who are part of those conversations in farming, what we hear a lot about in terms of the solutions for climate change, like how do we practice regenerative agriculture or whatever it is, like how do we convert these mega farms into being more sustainable? And I think really the question that we need to ask is how do we have that scale, that we have the large amount of acreage under sustainable production, regenerative, or however you want to coin it, agroecology, right? But supporting all the people who are part of it in the communities by having work with dignity, and that people who bring their different relationships to the land and understanding the different ecosystems that exist that have been largely made into monoculture, right? Instead, how do we activate our different knowledges, cultural practices, relationships with each other, relationships with the land, to diversify, right, while also diversify our crops and how we grow, and attain a scale through cooperation. And so Arizmendi is such a great example of that in terms of bakeries, and we can draw from that for other sectors as well. All right, so there's 5 Arizmendis, and there's starting one in South LA. Yeah. That was at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know where it's at right now, but I think that's a good thing to check in on.
How is it spelled?
Arizmendi, ARIZMENDI. Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're 5 minutes over.
Carol shared that one of you had some numbers.
Yeah, amazing connection to Arizmendi. That when we were just having a meeting at Bread and Salt, because they're related to the bakery. The Jim and Isabel, who are the owners of, they were hosting an event related to architecture, something. Anyway, and Isabel comes and introduced this man. He says, "Hi, I'm Pankaj, and I'm an urban planner and a baker." And I'm like, "That's funny, I am too," you know? So we get more into it, and then he talks about how he owned a bakery in the Bay Area. So I'm like, "Oh, you're not just a baker, you've owned a bakery." He said he started the one in the Arizmendi in Mission 10 years ago.
Oh,
and he
wow.
actually just moved to San Diego to start studying like family.
Oh, amazing.
So
Yeah.
ultimately he's here now.
Oh, great.
So
Because, yeah, that's the Valencia one. The mission one is Arizmendi Valencia, is what they call it.
Oh,
so
okay.
so that's great. So this mission statement is the one that he was probably a part of crafting.
Yes, that's
Great. What was his name again?
Pankaj.
Pankaj. Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think he moved here maybe 6 months ago.
Okay, well, hopefully we can bring him to the next session. Great. Okay, next one. We offer you access to high quality cleanings at honest prices delivered with care through fair work practices. Yes, worker cooperative? No, not a worker cooperative.
You all are.
Did you ever? You think it's yes? You're right again. All right. Okay, so this one is actually really interesting. This is for Up and Go, and it's an app. Yeah, and this app is a cooperative business amongst 6 cooperatives. So here, so we talked about Arizmendi as all those bakeries are actually independent from each other, and the relationship is the name Arizmendi, so that they could benefit from that reputation, the positive reputation that Arizmendi already has. But then there's Arizmendi San Rafael, Arizmendi Grand Lake, there's Arizmendi Valencia, all that. But they're autonomous. They don't formally work together. Up and Go is this app that is a business owned by 6 different cooperatives. So they cooperatively run Up and Go. And what the app does is for the consumer, a customer who is looking for someone to clean their house, they can go on the app and say, "I need someone to come this time," or a recurring, service to come. And on the user end, UX perspective is, okay, great, it's easy for me to just find someone. On the back end, though, what's happening is that the search results of whose schedule might work for the person looking for cleaning services is that they're drawing from the availability of worker owners from 6 different cleaning worker cooperatives. So each of those govern themselves, right? determine their wages and organizing or business structure. And this enables them to retain their autonomy, but it's a way for people, for service workers who are typically kind of left out of our digital tools, right? Because a lot of the people who work in these cooperatives, a part of Up and Go, are monolingual or predominantly speak Spanish and don't have the high digital experience that would be required for creating an app and managing it. And so they all contribute 5% of their 5% of their service fees to running the app, which is a very low contribution. And so yeah, this has been a way for us to try to support service workers in the digital age and application. So yeah, this was developing when I was a board member of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, and a lot of our conversations are like, yeah, how do we bridge blue collar work with the digital age? So it's been very successful, and a lot of the people who participate in it, they've been able to make a lot more money, have a lot more flexible schedules, and yeah, value this cooperation amongst cooperatives and having this other entity that they can still control in terms of the digital space. Did you have a question?
Yeah, just have a quick one. Can I franchise be considered a
Yes.
cooperative?
So this is a franchise model.
Oh.
Yeah.
Co-op franchise model.
Yeah, cooperative franchise. So again, going back to this idea of how do we attain scale via McDonald's, right? But of cooperatives. And so we can do that by this kind of replication, by sharing, by supporting each other and starting out. Okay, so last one, worker co-op or not. Where'd that paper go? Our mission is to build long-term trade partnerships that are economically just and environmentally sound, to foster mutually beneficial relationships between farmers and consumers, and to demonstrate through our success the contribution of fair trade to a more equitable, democratic, and sustainable world. Does it sound like cooperative greenwashing, or is it actually a cooperative? Yes, cooperative? Okay, and then no, not a cooperative. All right. It is a cooperative. This is Equal Exchange. Equal Exchange is a coffee, chocolate, and tea company. I think they have 200 employees now, and they work internationally to source coffee, tea, and chocolate from cooperatives. So they also support small farms as being cooperatives, and they source from them through also a cooperative supply chain. So the people also doing the shipping and all of that, supporting that all along the way, this global supply network consists of people who own it and are democratically running it.
So when I read that, it sounds more like a vision and not a specific service. It seems like it was a lot of service in one.
Yeah.
Or more like a nonprofit.
Yeah, also I think they've been around for a lot longer. So I think they've updated it since the original creation of it, but because they've become such a powerful company within the sector of coffee, where there has been a lot more companies are like, oh, we're fair trade or whatever, but they're not what is fair trade if the farmers are still not owning their businesses and governing it, right? It's sort of I've found that when I've talked to them, it seems to me like they're trying to make a statement in a world of greenwashing to say this is where we've been and where we stand, and we want to be really clear about that. And I also just want to read their full statement that includes specific language. Equal Exchange's mission is to build long-term trade partnerships that are economically just and environmentally sound, to foster mutually beneficial relationships between farmers and consumers, and to demonstrate through our success the contribution of worker cooperatives and fair trade to a more equitable, democratic, and sustainable world. So I think that part too is, I think it is visiony, and also they're one of the few people who groups that have successfully demonstrated worker ownership can be strong and scaled and like be a really large international force as well. Yeah, in a very fraught commodity sector. Okay, so as you can see when you go through the little list, everybody was a worker cooperative. And what I wanted to show is that worker cooperatives aren't all different kinds of sectors. And that this model is applicable, it's just whether or not we make the effort to build it up in those sectors. So we went over a little bit. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm sure you're very hungry. So what we're going to do now is take a break for lunch. And when we come back, we will get into the governance structure, the nitty-gritty questions that you all have been bubbling up for you. Like, what does it look like to actually start a worker co-op? What do you need to do that, to file? How do you work with others? And yeah, we'll go into the step-by-step process after lunch.
Thank you, Mai. That was a great morning session. So it is time for lunch, and I would like to just have you all have Juan Pablo Sanchez introduce himself. He has catered our lunch today. Would love for you to just share, Juan Pablo, who you are, your restaurant, and what we're having for lunch.
Juan Pablo Sanchez, owner of Super Cocina, City Heights. So the dishes you can try is your traditional salads, which are home-style cooking. You've probably seen other Mexican fare. So today there was steak in adobo. There was a sauce made with different types of fresh peppers and dry peppers. So you'll have a very rich, flavorful cuts of steak. We also have, I think it's more like, I actually didn't see that. We always been going for children, so I'm getting confused, but I can tell you what they're outside. We have some calabacitas, which are vegan, but you can add cream and cheese, which is the traditional way of eating them. Also, we're trying out these vegan potato and soy chorizo, so let me know if you guys like those, because they're kind of like a new thing. Try to expand on our vegan menu. The rice and beans, we have some guacamole, homemade guacamole. I think it's chicken and cilantro. And cilantro is a Mexico City style dish. It's chicken in a cream sauce made with white wine and cilantro base. So I think you guys will enjoy it. Any questions, let me know. Again, Super Cocina in City Heights. Come visit City Heights.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Really appreciate you feeding us. So yeah, out back, I don't know if everyone's been outside yet, but time to get up, walk around, breathe in the fresh air, and eat some delicious food, and just network to your thing. We'll kind of reconvene at like 1-ish. Okay, back at it. So with that, we've got a pretty deep afternoon now where we're going to actually focus on how to start a worker co-op. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Mai and let us know if there's anything that can support you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I understand coming back from lunch is tough. You want to talk to people also. I just want to sleep. The energy is down. I am digesting those beans, making me very sleepy. And yeah, great to have that. But okay, so let's actually just get up and do some stretches. I think have that food, circulate through to do its job of spreading its nutrients, providing energy. So maybe if you want to follow with me, you're welcome to. You're just bringing your arms up and breathing in. Breathing out, bringing your arms down, kind of like touching the sides of that circle that you're in, your personal space bubble that is very close to other people's. Doing another breath in, touching that circle on its way up. Ooh, and then maybe just doing a side stretch a little bit to the left, right, and a little bit to the left. And then breathing out, bringing arms down. Okay, and then how about some shoulder circles going back? Oh yeah, especially loosening up the muscles around your neck that kind of get tense from sitting and writing for a long time. Okay, now circles moving forward. Okay, and how about hands in the back, lifting them up Breathing in, so your chest comes out. Ooh, I felt 3 pops. Okay. And breathing out, relaxing, and 2 more breaths. Opening up your chest, your heart. Breathing out. 1 more breath in. Opening up your chest, filling up the belly with air. Breathing out. Okay, we shake out our arms, blood flow. And then I just like to rock my hips, sitting for a long time. You can pretend you've got that slow hula hoop. Hip circles. And yeah, and then maybe if you want to brace yourself, just doing some like ankle rotations. Rotations, one your right foot, clockwise, then counterclockwise. Wiggle your toes in there. Point your toes. Yep, and then other foot, left foot rotation to clockwise, counterclockwise, toe wiggle, toe point, and yeah, just let it all integrate. Okay. All right. Thanks for joining me in that. And I feel things going into my head now. Yeah, I'm ready. What was a little bit empty is now getting refilled. We also, Danielle had to leave to get her kids. If anyone wants to fill this seat here next to Jorge, that's open, and then
Rui's here still, but there's one here.
Rui's still here, but there's 2 seats over here. If anyone wants to fill in, to keep our intimate space. And then you're new.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
We did a round of introductions before, just inviting people to say their name, pronouns if you wish, what your favorite market or grocery store is. And then if you're coming from the food, farm, or like other sector. I know that's kind of a lot. I can remind you.
I'm Tan, he, him. My favorite grocery store, I like Wholesome Choice. It's like a Persian market. There's like 2 locations. I don't know exactly what it is. I guess my sector is I'm a student at UCSD. And I'm in a class about food systems, so I decided to come here.
Oh, cool. Thank you for joining us. And also, there was a question earlier about co-ops on the UCSD campus. So, do you know anything about that? And can you update us on the status of at least the J Cafe?
Yes, there are multiple co-ops on the UCSD campus. I'm part of the food co-op.
Great. That was mentioned. Yeah.
The food co-op, it aims to provide like affordable vegan food to like just the community, like not like student restricted, anyone can come in. And then there is a couple where there's Groundwork, which is a bookstore. There's the G store, which is like just a general like store.
The G store, you said?
Yeah.
Like the letter G?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, did you ever say cheese store? Because that'd be amazing. But okay. G store, got it.
And then the J Cafe exists still.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's generally what we get is like, it still exists. Is it a co-op? What is happening there? Can I go see a show? Who knows, but it still exists.
Yes, I guess it would still be a co-op. And shows are still open to people. And then I think all of the co-ops at UCSD have like lease negotiations soon. And it's been like the same, I think it's like it's been like a $1 rent for like X amount of years, but they're trying to make it so there's actual rent. And we do not make enough money to pay actual rent.
Right. I mean, $1 a year is still actual rent, so they just want to make more money. Yeah.
They don't make actual money.
Yeah.
They can't legally raise it more than 5% or something.
Yeah, where's rent control? But thank you very much for letting me put you on the spot for the UCSD update.
But to build on that, what I did learn is that this movement of co-ops at UCSD that maybe happened in the 80s or so did start a co-op bakery in Ocean Beach, which then became the co-op of People's Market.
Oh, cool.
So they've had a lot, very like effect in spreading cross culture in San Diego.
I didn't realize.
Okay, so kind of a little distracted. But yeah, the UCSD co-ops were helpful in getting other co-ops started.
A bakery in Ocean Beach.
Bakery in Ocean Beach, yeah.
I forget the name. That then transitioned to People's Market.
Right, yes. Yeah, there was a very active bakery in like the 60s, a co-op bakery in OB, and then 70s, and then the 80s. So each decade had
Different ones?
different ones, but then there was some overlap amongst the people. Yeah. But yeah, the co-op history of San Diego is something else that we can get into at another time. But yeah, helpful to know just that UCSD, even though largely I feel feels distinct from the rest of the San Diego ecosystem, does have this student community that those who I've interacted with who've gone on to start other co-ops or join other cooperatives, that space, because it's like one corridor mostly on UCSD campus where that food co-op exists, and the bookstore and all of that. It creates that culture of cooperatives amongst cooperatives and community that, I've seen people leave from there bringing that ethos to other spaces. So, it's great to just foster that active community and have a hub. So that's what the Alliance is trying to do in this giant county. And as much as we can stay connected through these initiatives of starting up cooperatives, that connection is what helps build up others. All right, okay. Technical stuff. We've gone through the definition of a co-op, generally what cooperatives are, and then you got a sense of worker cooperatives and their structure, but I want to get deeper into that. And first off, in the structure of being a cooperative, I want to get more detailed into this distinction between governance and operations. So when we talk about the ownership of the cooperative, we're talking about governance. Does anyone have like an idea of how you define governance, especially in contrast to operations? I like your firm head shake of like, not me. I do not have it for you.
Hey, Mai, I'm so sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt before you get into the detail, but TARPAX has decided to make a little bit of a treat for folks, and so I just wanted to pass it to Jamila to share what's here for folks to just come and get up themselves. So Jamila,
We just wanted to show our appreciation for you guys, so you guys keep continuing to come back and support us here at Cafe X. So we put together a little dessert for you guys to enjoy. It is a cinnamon roll with some warm peach on top. And we also have some leftover parfaits from breakfast, so whenever you guys want, you guys can come enjoy it. But thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
All right, well, I can't compete with that, so how about we take a moment where if anyone wants to go get a lovely dessert, I'm going to start, I'll just start writing on this chart about the governance and operations. So feel free to get a treat. No, it looks
warm,
beautiful.
so I
Like warm.
want to eat it while it's warm.
Look at
Would
those
you like one?
individually served. Yes, thank you.
I just sent what's it called, a picture when you were writing this.
Oh, you guys should check it out.
Oh, he says it's that.
Okay.
Share.
Aw.
Do you know?
Yeah, from a long. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Oh yeah, yeah. We
very old friends in New York, and it's very rare to see like the same background and the same destination because she came to San
Yeah, I remember she has family in City Heights.
She's an attorney.
Yeah. It's extended family. Her mom's in Texas, but she has she has cousins. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Like the thing I see on her Instagram, she'll send her photos of different like Vietnamese-owned businesses in City Heights when she visits her family. But yeah. Yeah, but yeah, she works at Dowie, and when I was on the board of the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, that is the sister organization of Dowie. So I was on the board of, so yeah, she's great.
And then when he looked at it,
Yeah, and she does so much organizing and work on tenants' rights over there, just like outside of work. She does so many great things outside of her co-op work too.
It hasn't been an easy childhood but I'm very grateful that you shared that landscape with my very like her dynamic. They're all her North Star is just work.
Yeah.
I'm really living it. Where you were explaining this sort of co-op owned, and there is a definition.
yeah, I think the casting of the
Right?
People who use these terms, they're still not quite a cooperative because it's not democratic. So sometimes you can have like ownership, but there's still, it's not necessarily democratic governance of one type or one vote. Or cooperative would still be like putting it up to more than just an executive suite, but it's still not.
It could be part of your first piece because it was hard to grasp.
The Mexican
And also, I know you're transitioning out of the fashion textile stuff, but have you connected with the fiber shed at all?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking maybe that and also, do you know Sway, LASUAY, Los Angeles, what they do, they're actually converting to become a worker cooperative.
You know there's a chocolate one
SUAY Los Angeles, what they have a few different programs to try to reduce clothing waste. So one is they have a monthly dye bath, so people can send in and choose a color that they change the colors every month, and so you can dye your clothes instead of throwing away. They also accept like old towels or old tents. They remake them into jackets. They make the tents into like waterproof jackets for more goodness. They remake clothes. They also do workshops of repair and mending and all that stuff. But they're great. They're just so maybe they're closer and becoming a cooperative. So they might just be many years ago. You're welcome to email me. My website doesn't have all of these things, but yeah, you're welcome to email me. Basic. I have a website and then I have like my email. Yeah, and my website is being updated, but they're going to send out the resources on how to be in touch. Yeah, in the description it has my Okay, folks. 1:30 already. It's about an hour and squeeze this in. All right. Okay. I'm gonna power up with this sugar, and I'm gonna talk really fast whenever it hits me. Okay.
Yeah, and one that's like
that tea earlier was really delicious, and also I'm very sensitive to sugar, so I was just like, yeah, very jittery after that. Okay. So what we were talking about is that there's governance and operations. when you talk about that a cooperative being a, what is a cooperative?
The business.
Yeah, and what kind of business? Service. Really like throwing out the keywords. Just go through the Rolodex.
Business service outcomes.
Oh, it's a democratically ran.
Owned. Yeah, democratically owned business. So when we refer to the democratic part, we're talking about the governance, not about the operations. So governance is also an area that doesn't have like a very succinct definition. There's all different kinds out there, but one way you can think about it, it's the rules, norms, and actions that are structured, sustained, regulated, and held accountable to further the organizational direction and policies. It's not very elegant, but I'll break down. The rules, we mean like policies basically. Norms, that's the culture of the place. And actions. The way they're structured, sustained, regulated, and held accountable, right? So that's the implementation of the policies. Though that's the governance piece, right? So that's different from the operations. So we'll take the example of a bakery, right? The operations are like mixing the dough, baking the bread, or doing the bookkeeping. That kind of stuff, those fit into people's job descriptions for operations, and you might also have you can in a worker cooperative have management and people who aren't in a management role but also worker employees. At the same time, there's the governance structure, which is an overlay, and that's where you have a board, and that board is in charge of making these decisions and overseeing that kind of ensuring that the policies, norms, and all of that are being followed. So does that distinction make sense? So those are really helpful distinctions to keep in mind when you're starting up a worker co-op. The reality is that startups are small and people are wearing multiple hats. They are workers, they're probably also a manager of some division of the business, and they're also a board member. And then you just have to keep in mind when it is that you're having a discussion that is a governance discussion, a operations discussion, and then if you're really fine-tuning it, a legal discussion, which is a segment under governance, right? So legal is talking about your bylaws, and that typically co-ops update them once a year. Legally, you're supposed to update them once a year, but sometimes you can have more frequent updates, especially for startup cooperatives, where they're still figuring things out and fine-tuning their bylaws and adapting them as they go. You might have more frequent updates. Yes.
Would it be helpful if being a part of a governance or board that you take like that Robert Brown Act class as a whole to make it a little bit easier to understand?
The
Brown Act.
Brown Act. Tell me about the Brown Act.
The Brown Act is like a set of rules that are put in place when you have that type of an organization, so that you follow the rules in a precise manner, so that you don't deviate from your conversations. And it's just rules, basically. Rules.
Is it like Robert's rules?
Robert's rules, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
The city of San Diego and the county follow the Brown Act.
Okay.
Yeah, they follow all the
I see.
all
So
boards and governances should follow the Brown Act.
I see. Okay. So San Diego implemented either an ordinance or a bill that's called the Brown Act that stipulates that decisions need to be made according to Robert's rules. Is that right?
Well, I mean, I think it's just more of a foundation on how to run your organization. And it kind of keeps you grounded in how everybody kind of decides. And like if there's, say like you just said, there's a conversation that's had between two people. Are we talking about, is it governance? Is it operations? So basically the communication between two people should never happen. It should be
Kind of keeps things public.
Yeah, it should be between three people. not two people, because then you could be, you know, it's like a really like weird area.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. And I think just wanting to distinguish it for everyone else, that so there's something called Robert's Rules, which I actually don't really know the history of that, but it does set the norms like you're talking about. They're procedures for making decisions that account for like the who, how it's documented, all the steps. And then what it sounds like is that the City of San Diego has some sort of policy called the Brown Act that references Robert's Rules. So I just wanted to distinguish between the policy and the actual procedures that you would use. So for anybody who wants to look to an existing set of procedures for decision making as well as documentation and all of that, you can look up Robert's Rules. Whereas looking up the Brown Act would be more specific to the application of that decision making procedure to San Diego public offices, I think. Yeah. And so I think I think what I'm hearing maybe as what you're getting at is what are the kinds of procedures available for making.
Yeah, it just seems like it's such a broad term. Like, how can you make it easier for everyone to kind of be on the same page? Because I know, like, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to have the same train of thought or, you know, the same ideas. And I mean, obviously everybody comes together to create something. But what if there's like a disgruntled somebody, and it could be, you know, it could be somebody that normally doesn't get, but how do you ground that? I don't know. It's like one of those gray areas. Like, I don't even know how to.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's kind of a few different threads to pull out from what you're saying. One is sort of like, how do you deal with someone who's disgruntled? And I think there's always one of the first policies that I work with groups to create is their termination policy. You can call it something else like departure policy. Some people are like, termination sounds really intense. It could be like whatever. And that's, I think what's important for us to recognize is that what might initially bring us together, once we start clarifying like, this is what the work is actually going to be, what it's going to take, this is the commitment, it doesn't work for everybody. And having a clear way for people to leave and not have it be emotional or complicated, right, like is a very important first step. I think so. There's the leaving piece. I think another part of what is coming out from what you're asking, or at least for me, is also about the grievance. It's really important to set up a committee or a means within the cooperative for grievance. So especially with a small group, you know, the minimum for starting up a cooperative is 3 people. That's a really small group. If one person has a problem with one other person, there's only one person left to listen, right? And so you need to think about what is your grievance process that's going to help the person with the grievance feel safe, and that the decision-making process from there is going to be equitable and equal, right? And so that's where people sometimes develop advisory committees, or have like, when you're small, right, just trying to engage other entities in order to go through a mediation process, usually mediation before any sort of departure process, right? But having a really clear grievance process is key, as well as the accountability procedures for what happens after someone voices something. What are you going to do according to your values, right? So that that person is able to exercise their rights and is heard, and that there's follow through. Yeah. So I think then going back to the other parts of your question of like how do you get everybody on the same page, right, about the decision-making process? I will go over different decision-making processes, but just to say for now is that it is up to each cooperative. At its foundation, it needs to be democratic, right, the one member, one vote, in terms of decision-making. And then how you might organize that, if it's representative democracy, direct democracy, or however else, and then once that's who's involved, and then the how, is it consensus, is it majority rule, is it modified consensus, all of that I will get into, and then we can talk about kind of what resources exist out there. Does that kind of cover?
I mean, it does answer, but as far as like the legal representation, is that like, because I mean I've never done this, but having somebody that's on a legal team, you could consult with them at any time. Is that something that?
Oh yeah, so we will also get to that in terms of what skills do you want to have within the cooperative and what skills do you want to have as consultants who are available to you on an as-needed basis. Right? So depending on the kind of work you're doing, it might be one where you want an attorney on within the worker cooperative. I was running Minnow, which was a nonprofit cooperative, but when I started the idea of Minnow, I was like, we're going to get land back and distribute land equitably. I need a lawyer, right? It was a very obvious, in my team building, needed a lawyer. Whereas, say for a bakery, you might not need that as your initial step. Yeah. But yeah, we will get into sort of thinking through the sort of hiring criteria and membership quite soon. Okay. So operations, the distinction between operations and governance. Is that pretty clear? Questions? No? Okay. I feel that cinnamon roll very slowly, that sugar. Yes?
I'm curious how creative, it sounds like there is multiple tasks to govern yourself. I mean, sociocracy, I haven't heard you mention that, but anyways, just curious, this Robert's rule, do you need to have something like that in the co-op, be creative, and develop a way of making motions, I guess, for
Yeah, so yeah, you can create your own system, but what you need to make sure of is that it's practicable, right? And that people follow through, because that, going back to what I had said earlier about the main practice that cooperatives are constantly struggling with is ensuring that we follow through with our stated values by being accountable to the collective agreements we've made, right? And again, just in our society more broadly, right? Promises made, a lot of them exist, policies exist, where's the follow through, right? And then it is useful to have, it can be helpful to have an attorney look over the procedures, if for governance decisions and in the bylaws, to just make sure that it's legally sound, right? And that it is democratic and that it's even internally consistent. But what's nice about the democratic process is that you can create something that works for you. It's just that what works in the moment too can be different down the road when you bring on other people, and what's the process of ensuring that you're building something from the start that is going to be lasting. And that's why I think so many people rely on Robert's rules, because it has been around for so long. That's the parliamentary process in Canada, in Britain. I mean, are those stellar governments for that? Yeah, but it exists. And I think that too, it's something that I find with cooperatives in general, is this opportunity to create anew, and at the same time, it's a chance for us to examine the past of what we can actually still take with us. What are some gems and wisdom of what's been built and done that maybe wasn't practiced well, but is still worth holding on to rather than creating something totally new. And I often find groups realizing that there is something worth salvaging of the past, even though as we try to envision a different way of working together, different relations between ourselves and the environment, right, that there's still mechanisms that might be from like the corporate sector or wherever else that's like, oh, these are actually have been practiced and they're useful, but how do we differentiate between the tool and its use, right? Anyways, so I'll leave it there. But in terms of, yeah, the Roberts rules as a tool can be helpful, and that there is flexibility. You just want to ensure that everybody knows about it. So going back to the principle of democratic member control in a way where people know what the policies are. They're not so complicated that they are difficult to maintain, and not so simple that it leaves too much room for misinterpretation or gaps or not accounting for people's needs. Yeah. Okay. So I do want to go ahead and talk about a little bit more about the members. And so for a worker cooperative, right, so the members are the worker owners. And at this, so you have that, you have the management and the board, and you can have overlapping roles. I think that's pretty clear. And now I want to introduce the like wild card, which is like employees. So how do you bring in new people? So at the beginning, there's whatever, 3 of you, you have your operations role, I don't know, baker, front of house, bookkeeper, for example. And then you've got the president, treasurer, secretary. Those are your governance roles, right? And now you want to expand. You want to bring in someone else. And there's this, you can bring on people into the business as an employee without being a worker owner. And this accounts for sort of the financial experience and trust based reasons for having this period before someone is an owner, right? So financial, which is usually to become a worker owner, to own something, you're going to contribute money. And so for someone starting out, they might not have the money to buy into the co-op. And so there are structures that people have created where an employee working can allocate a percentage of their salary or wages towards their member buy-in. There's also options for loans and things like that. There's multiple ways that you can try to address that a new person is going to have this financial contribution that they may not be ready for at the beginning. But also experience. It's really challenging to hire someone who has both your operations needs and the governance experience. There are so few people who have co-op experience, right? So more likely you're going to be able to hire maybe like another baker, but how likely is it that it's a baker who has a lot of experience in cooperatives? Okay? So having this time where they're an employee, and usually the co-op investing in their training in terms of governance, maybe having some requirements in terms of the number of governance meetings that take place within the co-op, or to go to trainings, like the Cooperation Works is a national group that provides training for mostly co-op developers, but also to some degree co-op members, right? But and then also co-ops within themselves will develop their own like training curriculum so that it's catered to like, well, we want you to learn about us, not just like co-ops in general, but how we work. And so to account for the experience that someone needs to be a worker owner, that is usually an offering and oftentimes a requirement. Like for someone to actually apply for worker ownership, they need to have attended X number of workshops, X number of staff meetings, and usually there's some kind of assessment to say like, are you ready? Do you think you're ready? Do we think you're ready to be a worker owner? So then you apply, and then usually there's a very transparent process of feedback to say like, these are the things that we need to see improvement on in order for you to apply again, or maybe acceptance. So there is a rigorous process there, and I think built into that too is just accounting for an opportunity to build trust, right? Because working together, I'm sure you've had work experiences where you didn't get along with a coworker, and then increasing the stakes of that, of like owning a business together, making decisions that impact your livelihoods, right? That's a really important arena to be in. And actually talking to one of the owners of Cafe X, we were talking about how like it's like a marriage. You are really, your finances are tied together. It is like your day-to-day, everything is wrapped up, and so you really need the opportunity to build trust with each other. So that's usually why there's what people call like a probationary period, but eventually the pathway should be towards worker ownership, rather than keeping an employee on for a long time without that opportunity to become a worker owner. So, any questions there? I feel the like sheen of lunch. So.
I got a quick question. Go ahead.
Okay.
Actually, I'm like,
yeah, the sheen of lunch fell real heavy right there.
Yeah. So it's like a partnership. You know, like I'm thinking like a lawyer type. You know, partnership. Is that considered like
Oh, I mean, they could. There's actually a friend of mine. He started a legal team that's a cooperative, but oftentimes they're partnerships, they're LLCs. So not necessarily. They can, but I haven't seen many opt for that. But you know, like going back to our earlier session, right? It's like what I was trying to convey is like worker co-ops can be applied to any sector, pretty much, right? As long as there are workers, they can own it together. Yeah. So lawyers can do that. I mean, also there are people, like when I was at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives, there were a lot of people who were like freelancers, who were consultants, who formed a cooperative so that they can purchase healthcare together, and have a lower price for healthcare and dental plans, and also for tax reasons. So yeah, there's many different sectors that I can apply to. Okay.
Yeah, so as I hear you talk about bringing on employees, the research that I've done just in general about co-ops, it seems like people bring on owners with a percentage, like part-time, and they just own a really small percentage. How do you recommend that? Is that, I mean, it sounds pretty creative to me, but is that common practice, or is that something to avoid? So I haven't seen it as much, but I've seen it.
Okay, sorry, so just let me confirm that I heard you, that there are worker co-ops that hire people, employees or worker owners on part-time?
I mean, to me, it seemed like worker owners, but like 5% ownership, and the one I'm talking about was like tech-related, so like graphic design thing. So that 5% only constituted, such or X amount of work, and that's all you were hired for. You were only part of the co-op, or that makes sense.
Okay, so I guess what I'm understanding is that you've seen an option where someone is owning 5% of the company, okay, or a portion of the company.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not so familiar with it, but I'm trying to break it down. Thinking one is that like anybody is only just going to be a portion of it, right? Nobody's going to be owning all the shares. Yeah, everybody has their own share, And usually the buy-in should be the same amount for everybody who has come in. And then I think going to Patty's question from earlier, right, you're going to accrue equity over time because you've been working there longer. There's also the difference of like, yeah, there might be part-time people and full-time people, and the equity contribution is adjusted according to that. So this value of equity in terms of the amount of work that you put in is proportional to everybody else's, and the equity is adjusted for that. That is a part of the bookkeeping. So I think just thinking about a past place that you worked at, right? There was one person who was there maybe like 2 days a week. And there are some people there who were there 6 days a week, right? So the person there 2 days a week, their equity contribution should have been the same as everybody else's. Like any worker owner should have the same initial equity contribution to pay for their membership share. And then from there, if they choose to work more days or less days, and then also that's a part of the operations conversation, right? Is that then they're going to be paid accordingly in the immediate wage salary configuration, and then additionally the calculation of their equity share in the co-op is going to be proportional to the number of hours they worked. So when they leave, the person who works for maybe 2 days a week, the payout that they receive from the co-op is going to be less than someone who had worked 6 days a week, or 40-hour weeks a week or something like that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Everyone follow along there?
I was wondering if you could speak to maybe a model of transitioning somebody who's sort of like a new employee to becoming a member. Do they start joining the board meetings early on, something? How do they move towards that path, or how does the business cooperative guide them in that direction?
Okay, so yeah, first off, the co-op creates a job description for the need that they have, and they do an open call for hiring people, letting them know that it's for a co-op, so the expectations are going to be both operational and that there's an expectation that people will go on a pathway towards ownership, right? Then once people have gone through that rigorous hiring process, right, vetting, and they're brought on, then usually the co-op already has in place and will communicate to that person the expectations and timeline for becoming a worker owner, right? You don't want to string people along and be like, I don't know, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, right? You want to tell people, we expect you to do these trainings or gain this knowledge and experience through XYZ means, referring to what I had mentioned before about maybe attending meetings, trainings, whatever else, and then having a time where they're expected to apply, how much money it takes to apply, and then having a date for that, and then if there needs to be an assessment, also communicating with them the timeline if they need to do more work to show that they're ready to be a worker owner.
When you say more work, what do you mean by that?
Well, for example, someone went to all the trainings, but they're not demonstrating that they learned from it, right? Maybe you're like, oh, do this Robert's Rules training, but then whenever they bring up a motion or something, they do it not according to Robert's Rules. And we're like, okay, well, we'll let you know that. Try again, and they try again, and they are still not doing it, right? So that's kind of like a more minor example, but right, you want to show, you want them to demonstrate that they're ready, right? And be clear about what are the steps and the timeline. Yeah.
So more or less you to develop a timeline?
A timeline and steps, right? And I think that's another part of the work of the co-op internally, and also thinking about the cooperation amongst cooperatives and thinking about service providers too. It's just how much of that training do you provide in-house when you say we expect you to have gone through cooperative finance training, expect you to have gone through a consensus decision-making process training or whatever else, right? It's is someone in the co-op going to provide that training? Or is the co-op maybe too small, the capacity too limited for the co-op to do that, and it's relying on another cooperative to do that. That might be larger and have that curriculum developed, or is it leaning on technical assistance providers such as co-op developers? But yeah, it's important that the co-op is clear, right, and not just sort of throwing out new things, which is like, oh, you're not really ready because you have to, and then just like coming up with something else that they have to do, and making them feel like the goalpost is constantly being moved, right? They're just being upfront about what the steps are and ensuring that the steps are already in place for them to take.
Question, so every employee has to become in a certain time frame a worker owner? Or they can just be an employee, let's see, working only 1 day or 2 days and decided not to invest into a co-op, so we can have just employees, or they have to be worker.
Yeah, eventually you want them to become a worker owner, otherwise it's not a co-op anymore, right?
But if I have, let's see, how many percentage, so it has to be 100%.
No, so going back to what Jose's question was, right? You can have people be part-time, but still be a worker owner.
Okay.
So
But the goal is to get them on board as a member.
as a
That's
worker
how you're
owner.
hired.
So that's where this distinction between like operations and governance is key, right? Is that so? Eventually, you want everyone to be a part of the governance, so that you have a democratic entity, and so that they're all providing their vote, right? And they have a say over the happenings. And then in terms of the operations, someone who is part-time still has a full vote, right? So we're talking about someone who's working only 2 days a week. When it comes to making decisions about the co-op's policies on, say, like the termination policy, right, or amendments to the grievance policy, they'll have one full vote. Yeah, I know, this is where, in a lot of my training.
For me, it's just when, for example, you hire employees and they figure out, after 3 months, okay, there's nothing for me, so I have to leave, and I don't like to get really into a co-op ownership at all. But he promised in the beginning, yes, I am interested in that, so there is a termination process, a shopping dog.
Yeah, and then also there's a difference, right? There's the termination policy for being a worker owner, and there's a termination policy for operations when you have someone who's an employee who hasn't become a vested owner yet. So, so yeah, that's another layer too. So we were talking about the assessment of whether or not someone might apply to become a worker owner, and there's also just like the operations. You will also have a policy for hiring, right? Of just like, we hired you to be a baker, and we see that actually you're not very good at baking, and so there's a termination policy for that too. And so
there's no difference between, let's see, the normal solo one business, so we have determination like everyone else, so you can say.
In the realm where someone is an employee, then it is kind of similar to other conventional businesses. But once they're an owner, then there's a different set of criteria, and processes.
So, there's something I'm not too clear on. How do you determine equity for the co-op? Is it like on a yearly basis? Because, as you mentioned, the person who are coming, like a new person, and they say at 5%, you mentioned that they should have offered that person equal equity when they apply. What does that mean? Is it like a yearly basis that they determine equity for the co-op?
So I think let me kind of separate out a bit of the determination of equity. So one part is the equity contribution for buying into a cooperative. What I frequently see for like food startup cooperatives is like $5,000. I'm not saying that that's something that you should immediately adopt. Everybody needs to make their own assessments, which we'll get into. But like, and that was also a lot of buy-ins for food companies, like a pickle company that I can think of. That was like, that was also 15 years ago, so $5,000 meant a different amount then than it does now, right? But their logic was that it was basically an investment that you would make into like a used car, right? It's significant enough on the individual level. It's significant enough to the business. So anyway, so that's just an example of throwing out there for that initial buy-in. Then once you start working, right, there's the equity contribution by you showing up for work 40 hours a week. And then you can, depending on the kind of co-op, but an option for the co-op is that they might give the employee, the worker owners, an option to have like a window of a percentage that goes to the equity, their equity, and then there's different equity pockets within the cooperative, and some of them are not from individual contributions, but the collective contribution to the profits of the cooperative, and then so the distribution of those shares can vary depending on the cooperative when they pay out. And going back to what I was talking about, the benefits of worker cooperatives and their sustainability, is that oftentimes it's because everyone was involved in the democratic process of determining when the equity payouts would happen. People will often say like, no, we should not pay out this year because the co-op is going through, or like the co-op is within a sector that's going through some challenges right now. So rather than being paid out individually, let's keep it in the co-op so that we can invest in whatever the business needs, right? Versus the payout. And so there is usually an annual assessment, and then there's separately is also when someone leaves, right? And usually the annual assessment is according to the calendar year, so that people can file their taxes accordingly. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I have to read up a little more, but so the thing that, so for example, when you started the co-op, right, and say they start with 5, and each put in 5,000, that's 25.
Mm-hmm.
That's the equity they have. But then they've been going on for 10 years. So obviously, equity has grown, right? But then you have this new person want to come in. How could they offer them equal equity in that? Would they have to like see what the company value at the corporate value at the time, and then offer something, or would it be the initial 5,000 from that 10 years ago to buy?
Right. Yeah. So it depends on the cooperative, and so there are ones where they just have that fixed amount, or maybe they adjust with inflation. But usually they try to make it on par, where anyone coming in their initial investment is the same as someone who was maybe started at the beginning. And I will say even that, it won't feel equal, right? If you've been working somewhere for 10 years and you're a part of the startup, and the startup first 10 years is the hardest, right? Like feeling like someone just can throw in $5,000 is gonna feel like really unequal. And that's something that I find people, it's very challenging for people to overcome what we call like founder syndrome, or like martyr syndrome, right? Is like this feeling like, wow, I spent all that free time going to Mai's trainings or whatever and trying to start this up, and you're coming in, we've already built this, and you're just paying $5,000, you know? So, so yeah, I just want to name that while people might have the same financial contribution expectations, still it doesn't address these, real interpersonal feelings, or just like feelings that arise. Yeah.
But you also said that they start as employees and they make their way into membership, and if they use a percentage of their salary to gain that $5,000, no?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I suffer from founder syndrome, but I am like a serial startup person. So like I know what it takes to start something up, and that lift is still different than someone joining something that exists, and then even if they're working in there, it's different than the like creation.
They don't get the $10,000
But, okay. Rachel, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe ground this in that worked because I wasn't necessarily looking to join a worker-owned co-op. I was looking for my third job in Santa Cruz, just to pick them in. And they made it so easy. It was like an HR handbook. It was like, here's the accrual rate. You're a new employee, so it's kind of like when you accrue sick time or vacation time, you accrue more the longer you've been there. The accrual was in the shares of the co-op. So like as a 20-year-old, I started with like 1 share and it was valued at whatever it was. But the woman who had started that co-op 13 years ago, she had X number of shares. And the longer that I worked there, the more shares that I got. And technically I could have like attended the board meetings or maybe even had an equal say in what grain we stocked in the thing, but kind of that's where the shakeout of the social dynamics came about, where I didn't know a whole lot about homebrew grains yet, and so I wasn't going to like push my weight with my vote, although I could have, and my opinion was like valued and listened to, but like the vote was where I feel like expertise shined in different ways, but like my accrual rate was very black and white. Like this is the shares, this is how you accrue them. When I quit my job and moved away, it was like on a check, and those was the value of my shares was returned back to me like that.
Yeah, that's great, Tim. Thank you for illustrating that. And I also just, I think in terms of the payout too, I want to name that it's frequently not like immediate, the full amount. I think it's probably, I wonder if there's just like a different plan because you weren't a worker owner, but usually for worker owners, because the shares are so much larger, it'd be a really big dent to just pay someone out their 5,000 plus whatever they accrued. Usually it's paid out over time. So that's just a technicality that I want to mention because I've worked with a few startups where people did leave quite soon, and then the co-op was just like, oh, right now our finances are fine, we'll just pay you out the whole amount. And then they found a season later, especially on a farm where income is very seasonal, they're like, actually paying that person out has really sunk us, and now we're deeply in the red. So just something to consider, especially for startups.
Is that a guarantee that the membership fee is paid out?
It's a part of your equity share, so you're paid out your equity share when you leave. Yeah.
And also when you talk about like, I don't know, annual payouts, that's if the business profited, and then there would be some determination of how much profit they would share with their members every year or something?
So there's a difference between profit and equity, but we have like 15 minutes left, and I wanted to get into just like the business startup process, and then also what else is needed. So I'm wondering, I could keep answering specific questions, or I can move into these other areas. How do you want to spend the rest of our time? Okay. So yeah, I mean, again, this is an introductory workshop, and co-op development usually takes 2 years. So you're asking great questions, and we can have another follow-up session, and also I can answer questions by email. But I think for today, I would love to be able to have you step away just knowing some of the basics, and then we can get into the details of the like technicalities of how you distribute money and all of that. But I just want to see if there's anything else that I want to say about the finances, equity contribution, payouts. And that, again, there are no investors, right? So you can receive a business loan at the beginning to help with startup costs. And then what is leveraged, if it was not an existing business, is usually it's a personal loan. This is also where that whole like founder piece comes in, right? If someone was like, I staked my house on this business so that all of us could get this loan, right? People get strong feelings about the business and its direction that also lends back to this conversation about power, right? So, money and power, yes, okay. So, the next block that I want to talk about is just the business startup. So this is adjacent to our governance conversation, right? But starting up, you want to do a feasibility study. and I highly recommend having an external entity do the feasibility study. What's involved in the feasibility study is, it's like, is your business idea something that is solvent? Can you make money doing this business? Where you want to have it? What's the sector like? What are the marketing needs and all of that, right? So there's a feasibility study that's just about the business side of our definition. And then after that, you do an entity choice evaluation. And this is where it's helpful to have a co-op developer or people who specialize in cooperatives, if that's something that you know that you really want as one of your entity options, to help you think through, does it make more sense for us to be an LLC because we can't afford workers' comp? Or do we become a worker cooperative because we see the tax benefits of that and we can afford workers' compensation? Right? LLCs, because it's technically a mechanism for people to co-own property, not a business. Originally it was for a property. The assumption is that there are no employees for LLCs. So that's why workers' compensation laws do not apply to LLCs. You do have to, whatever, that's more details, if I was doing an entity choice evaluation for you. But just to say that these different entities, does it make more sense to be a co-op, an LLC, a partnership, a corporation? That's something that I find very valuable to do with the professional, so that they can think through all those categories with you, right? And look at your financial means, and not just in terms of initial input, but over time, you know, the maintenance fees, like the refiling fees, $800 for filing and all of that stuff. Can you maintain that? And then once you decide on your entity, if it is a co-op, then you file with the state of California your articles of incorporation, which are very generic. It's basically saying we're going to be a co-op. In California, we are one of the very few states that have worker cooperative statutes. So that means other states, you might be able to apply as a cooperative, and it's assumed that it's an agricultural cooperative. That's like the oldest kind. And they don't necessarily have worker cooperative statutes. California does, so you need to follow the legal code for that. But it's to say that the state will recognize a worker cooperative, and then your bylaws that you file with those articles of incorporation, that's what's going to be specific about who can be a worker owner, how your decisions are made, what your termination policy is, all those other policies that you want to have in place. And again, I mean, there are, if you go to cooplaw.org, there's a whole collaborative of co-op attorneys who have done a really great job of, yeah, cooplaw.org, and this is going to be sent out to you all. But that website's very helpful for having some examples of bylaws, and I never recommend copy pasting, but just looking at it so you can get the skeleton is really key. And then straddling the sort of next section that I want to talk about, I mean, I'll just talk about it when I get there. But anyway, there's some basic parts that I think are worth having. Yeah, for startup, you'll also want to have at least the funds available for the basic expenses, such as the filing fee, workers' compensation, and having that bank account that is distinct from someone's individual bank account. And that soon follows your incorporation. You'll get notified, and then you can go to the bank and create your bank account. So that's like the really simple business startup technical side that our government needs to see to tax you accordingly. So any questions on those steps? Okay. All right, great, we are doing good. Okay, now I want to talk about what is important for the group to have, and this is different than what the state requires you to have. And I would say that what the group needs to have, you want to have in place long before you, well, maybe like you do the feasibility study concurrent with this, but all this stuff is like this is the fundamental relational part that is really going to determine your success, which is like how well you get along together and have clear ways to work together on not just like creating the business, but understanding what it will look like to work together, right? It's the dating part, okay? And if only dating had, or maybe, maybe I'll tell my kids, dating, do a vision, mission, values session, and giving the group the time to work together and to explore what your shared values are, and to refine your mission, because your mission's going to be that compass, right? That like when someone proposes something, like you're in the bakery and someone's like, well, but what if we also start a kombucha line? And you're like, that is not the mission, right? So just having the mission just be super clear from the start. But at the beginning, that's when everyone wants to pile in all of their different mission ideas. They're like, yes, let's do a bakery that's a kombucha line, that's also hard kombucha, and lifestyle magazine with gems, right? Like, so you want to like go through a process of refining what your specific mission is, and articulating your broader vision. How does that mission fit into a bigger world? And that's also related to your values. So that excavation of your values, of individual values, and then of how other people live their values, what those values mean to them. The values it's a heart space that is going to help you get through the tough times of being a startup. It's what I've started to help groups understand is like, there is a kind of sacredness. You might not be religious or spiritual, but there is a sacredness to starting something, right? To put your dreams and visions and hopes into the same pot as other people and mix it up together, that's a really sacred and vulnerable place, right? And so from there, you want to see what are the values that people are tapping into to manifest that, and do I jive with that? Is that how I work? And also, we all come from our different experiences, and how we see other people manifesting their vision, can remind us of past experiences, positive, negative, right? And it brings up for us like, what are the ways that we want to manifest our values in this particular business that we're starting together? So having the time to work together, having either through a facilitated process or just a very intentional process of examining those values and your experiences, where those values come from, when those values have been questioned, and letting other people know and building that into a structure of relationships together to be like, seeing this play out does not work for me, right? Or like seeing these kinds of actions that go against these values are really challenging for me. Being able to voice that, having a time to voice that, is, I think, a really critical part of the co-op development process. Did you have something that you want to say? No, sorry. Okay, so there's that informal time where you haven't committed yet, still dating, right? But you still want to make clear, like, how do you make decisions? And so having a clear decision-making process. So today I'm not going to do a training on different decision-making processes, but for democratic decision-making, like, there's a full spectrum from consensus, which is like where everybody needs to agree. There's modified consensus where you need people to agree to a certain point, but if there's someone or some people who keep blocking, you might have a quorum, which is like a certain number of people have had to say yes to it, and you still move on. So there's all of that. So there's not just the decision-making once something's been proposed, but also the decision-making process. How does someone propose something? Who is able to propose it? Who is a part of making the decisions, right? Especially when it comes to early operations. You know, people are so stretched trying to wear these different hats, but then also being like, do I have to weigh in on whether or not we buy fencing? It's like, less than $200, can you just decide that amongst yourselves, right? Like, so coming up with the decision-making protocol is really key for a beginning group. Also, your conflict prevention, mediation, and resolution processes. Prevention is a little bit trickier. I think this is where that space where people come together to share basically what helps you bring your best self is a part of conflict prevention, right? Being honest about like, I do best by, you know, like making sure that I had enough sleep, that I get time to take breaks, you know, at these intervals or whatever else, right? You can't accommodate everybody, but having the intentional time to hear each other out of what's going to help you show up well and work together well is a part of conflict prevention. Conflict mediation, what are you going to do? There is a challenge. You're a small group. You're not formalized yet. You don't have bylaws, but still having agreements with each other of how you're going to do that. And then also resolution, right? Being really clear, like if we have a conflict, you know, how do we get past that and not just have it be a way to, you know, cancel each other. Again, termination, talked about that. And then also an organized record-keeping procedure for decisions and finances. So again, at the beginning, I think it can be tricky where I've seen it just be challenging with the finances where like, it's like you carpooled to training and one person paid for the gas. And so you want to like count that in for when you are a business so then you can cover those costs, right? It's just that bookkeeping at the beginning, even if it's a very basic notepad or spreadsheet, Google Doc, whatever it is, it's important to have at that startup. And yeah, for this group, beneficial to have, I think, is also just friends. Like to cultivate and be explicit about having maybe an advisory group. So if you're starting up, to just have some people who everybody trusts, who has some experience in maybe a startup or the realm that you're in, and or in conflict mediation, right? So that group is someone that you can lean on for perspective. Because so often what I see when people are in startup mode is then they're working so hard to build all these pieces with whatever time they have, and it becomes this insular internal conversation. And so when challenges arise, people only look up to see the people immediately in front of them. And if the conflict is with those people, it's really helpful to be able to feel like you can have some space and lean back and feel like there are other people who will catch you. So that's my advice for a startup, having the vision, mission, values, spending time together to understand your values, to develop these collective agreements, even before you formalize them. Because it's also an opportunity for you to practice and see what works for you before you formalize it into bylaws. Any questions on that?
It will be sending an email with some resources or no?
Your notes.
My notes. I mean, I'm happy to share resources, and I'll just say that like there are some few like really great resources on like how to structure a beginning cooperative. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm naming right now, because I went from the technicalities of articles of incorporation and all of that stuff, and then moved over to the things that are beneficial. That's the stuff that is not very well documented. There's not a lot of resources on that. I think in the collective and social justice, environmental justice organizing spaces, there are some examples of the collective agreements that people have gone through. There's some digesting of what it looks like to organize together, and I think that's maybe more helpful space, but that in itself is also vast and maybe not very well archived. So I encourage you to look into those arenas though, not just like the co-op world, but just like in the environmental justice, social justice efforts when people have had gatherings such as the U.S. Social Forum or the Nayarit forum where they adopted the Hemes principles. Anyways, I know it's just floating around in here. This is the archive, but there's not a lot out there that's just like straight up like, if you're a group that's starting up and you want to be a co-op but you're not there yet, this is what you should pay attention to. Yeah, it's so much of leaning into, I think, the informal organizing spaces. Yes.
I didn't want to like blow up or interrupt the whole thing, but what she's saying is so point on about the vision and the shared value part, and I feel like that is like the core. That is what's going to sustain you in those hard times where you have any disagreements or you need to find direction. So along with the help with sociology, how do groups work together and all those things, know thyself. You really need to understand, like she said, how you work, what your triggers are, how you work best. I'll give you a good example. This is a wonderful example. This was so funny. We were in a group discussion because we started with like a table of like 12 different people in the beginning. And we got down to about 3 or 4 of us. We were in a meeting and it's just kind of trying to really get to know each other and where we stood on how we communicated and all those kinds of things. And I think one of the questions was, in what emotional state do you feel most comfortable? It was something around like that. I'm paraphrasing right now, I'm hoping. But it was something that had to do in what environment you feel most comfortable, or what emotion you feel that you feel most comfortable with. So people were saying things like joy, and I'm like, when it's peaceful, I'm a person of solitude, or whatever it was. And we had one person in the group that said anger. Exactly. What? Anger? For real, So, and that was the person that we had the most difficulty with, because that's where he thrived there. He thrived in that. I mean, walking out of meetings and all those kind of things, and not really knowing how to communicate effectively and letting someone else at least knowing what's triggering. I don't know what's triggering you, girl. Get to the bottom of that. But before you do that, you really have to understand how you approach people when those things happen. So a big part, I think, of what they do in Rise and did in Rise that I, kind of stuck out to me is that they found out that they dealt with, their internally. They went in, and what kind of work environments do I work best? I mean, I worked in all kinds of consulting, a whole lot of things, and work groups and all kinds of things. And you need the diversity in the group. Understanding those different, like Who Moved My Cheese? You guys remember that one from way back? Maybe some of you guys are too young for Who Moved My Cheese. But there are all these different personalities. These little minds have different little personalities and how they work and communicate. I think it's really important to know that, to really understand that. And when you come into a situation where you're in this co-op, like she's saying, it's very intimate. It's a marriage. It's a double marriage. It's not like regular business. And I think if you go in with the intention of, he and I have gone in with the intention that we're going to promote other businesses. That's why you see the peanut butter chews here today with Cecilia. That's why you see Black Girls Who Garden. That's why Brightside Distribution has their stuff here. We've been very intentional about including and bringing all these different, businesses and community members together. And that was established way early, right? So if there's ever a question of then, okay, well, what kind of business is it? Well, we need a variety, and everybody, anybody who's aligned with the community, that's where we just kind of try and bring them along. But I said that, I'll back it back up for anybody in the back that might not have heard it. Knowing how you develop yourself, how you deal with difficult people, how you deal with quiet people, just working, I guess, in a place of compassion, like she was saying. Because when it's coming out of that spot, you are rarely going to be off track. I feel like as she was talking, I said, "Ooh, I'm lucky to work with my daughter," and that has not always been smooth. I'll tell you that. Right? There's a dynamic, right, with mom and daughter, from the jump. So understanding that and working through that. So if you're working with family members that you're trying to develop, know that it's not necessarily going to be an easy road just because they're family. You know, because that's not the case. And we learned as we've gone along how to really do some things more effectively. So every day is a learning experience. So I just wanted to share that because I felt like that was like the crux and the most important part of it is really getting to, I mean, I've been working on self forever, and, anyway, I'll never stop doing that. But if you know that first, then it's going to be easier for you to deal with other people with some compassion and some understanding when they go off and do whatever they do, or they're not communicating. How do you get to the core of what the real issue is, not the surface thing, but what is the real issue? That only comes through a lot of meetings and conversation and getting to know that person. That brother was angry. That's okay. How can we make you not angry? How do you, when you come into a space where you're not angry, how does that make you feel? I think it was not a secure place for them. So anyway, I thought I'd share that because I thought it was important and something that to be aware of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much. Yeah, thank you for grounding all of the talk into your experience, and yeah, it's easy to mention, but yeah, the lived experience for anyone who's gone through it, that it's that's really where the work is. The know thyself, know each other, and also know when it's not working too, right? So it's all of that together. And so I'd say in my, I guess, 20 years of co-op experience, I think what I've seen change over the years is people's willingness to do that excavation within themselves, and their willingness to also share with others, and for others to practice a patience to understand each other. I think this is something that we've seen kind of in our society, right, that it's become more alienating, more isolating, and our tools for being in community and being in a relationship with each other, have been eroded, right? We, in the past, since the 80s in particular, right, we've seen a lot of our social spaces, public parks, public spaces, public transit, all of that being eroded. Places where we encounter people who are different from us, and just in a day-to-day see difference and accept it, right, or even celebrate it. And that also in this kind of atomization of our different roles into monetized services, right? That providing care for each other. It's a specific service that you exclusively pay for rather than a thing that you do also in community, right? I think there's both, right? We want to honor people's work, so we want to ensure there's that equity and equality there, right? That fairness there, but also when have we used that logic in a way that actually segregates us and disempowers us from actually showing up for each other, right? And so I also want to say that as I've seen worker cooperatives start and find these challenges, and people carving out their spaces for themselves within a collective and wanting the mission to serve them rather than them being a part of serving that mission, that challenge that I'm seeing a lot of people go through, and if you go through it, I also want to point out that it's not just about you, right? That there's this whole societal trend that is making it harder for us to work together, and so to start up a worker cooperative in this time of our whole human history is much more challenging than before, right? And so we do have the tools. We also have a history of cooperation, and we do have a desire to work together. And I think as much as we can tap into that and identify our shared values and lean into that and work together and have that practice and experience the joy of creating together in that sacred space, it's possible for us to then move from these more intimate spaces into the rest of society so that we can have a more democratic place. So, in that vein, it is challenging, and that's why asking for help is key. So key helpers, co-op developers. I feel like co-op developers are like doulas or like postpartum doulas that people think that they don't need until they're like in labor and they're like, oh, I really wish I needed some help. So I think it's great to engage a co-op developer from the start to get that perspective of like, these are the things that you can expect. It can be hard, you can do it. These are things that other people have done before, and these are some practical things that you can take care of. So a co-op developer is really helpful, and especially one who has experience in your sector. And then and again, it can take like 2 years, right? Think about, if you've been in a long-term relationship, probably, we're hanging out with someone for a very long time before you realize, like, does this work or not? Or sometimes you realize right away, someone who loves anger. You got the early signs, but it takes a while, right, to really get to know each other and get to know yourself. Lifelong process, right? A business planner. So again, co-op developers, some do business planning and co-op development. So co-op development being governance, business planning being operations. In San Diego, I'd say, I know the Alliance has worked with kitchen table consultants, Rebecca Frimmer a lot. But I think having a business planner to do the feasibility study, making the business plan, the market assessment, all of those are really valuable. And like I mentioned earlier, your accountant, the CPA, someone who understands co-ops, worker co-ops in particular, and the equity accrual, right? And that you're going to manage all of those distinct buckets of money that in the bank account, it just looks like savings, but in your spreadsheet is going to have different categories, right? Yeah.
It is difficult to find an accountant special in co-ops.
Yes. We are still developing that list. There's like a few of them, but I think at this stage what's nice is that a lot of that work can be done virtually. So there are some co-op bookkeeping groups where people have co-op experience. They're in a co-op of bookkeepers, and I know of one in Texas. There's one in the Bay Area, right? So there are different ones, and it's more about their capacity too. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
And then an attorney, a co-op attorney. You might have heard about the Sustainable Economies Law Center. That's a nonprofit of attorneys who work on cooperative economics, and that's super helpful to have their eyes on your legal documents, your incorporation documents, bylaws, and just ensuring that everything is in alignment. And I think also when you update your bylaws on an annual basis, it's still good to maintain the relationship with an attorney so that they can review it. And again, like I said, a team around you, that maybe it's an informal team. This isn't, a worker co-op isn't a nonprofit, but you can still have, maybe like for a bakery, maybe it's some customers who have experienced an attorney or conflict mediator, right? Just like people who already care about you, your business, and having that clear set of support so they know what you're going to ask of them, right? And it's a way also just to have more advocates for your business, right? If they know a little bit more about your business and how it's functioning, they're more likely to feel invested and want other people to care about it too. So, I think we're good on time now. That's the main stuff that I wanted to go over with you. We have maybe like 10 minutes for questions.
Yeah, you got 10, 15 minutes.
Okay. So yeah, 10 minutes for questions. Now that you've heard all that I wanted to say, we can go wherever you want with questions. Oh, did I answer everything? In the last bit?
My question, I remember like way back in college learning about co-ops and hearing about a resource or a group called CoFed. Do you know about them? Are they like a helpful resource in this arena, or is that like colleges? I don't know.
Yeah, so it's great that you bring it up. So CoFed, it started as a group that supported university students who were creating food cooperatives. And so the first one was the Berkeley Food Co-op, and then they networked with groups like the one at UCSD, and then became like a national group. And over time, though, they shifted. I'll just jump to more recently, that now they focus on youth leadership in land holding cooperatives of BIPOC farmers.
Okay.
Yeah. Much more specific. And then, but also Suparna is one of the executive directors, there are two, and she lives in San Diego, and she was actually at our previous workshop. So Suparna is a great visionary, storyteller, and she'll be at the California Co-op Conference that's going to be at the end of May, so May 31st and June 1st. That's hosted by the California Center for Cooperative Development. So that center is the only co-op development center for the entire state of California. And I mentioned like that's where I had worked before and gained a lot of my professional experience developing cooperatives. And so that conference is going to be a really great hub for meeting people who are CPAs, attorneys, co-op developers, some of them from different parts of the country, largely though California based, which is great because co-op law is specific to each state. And I've been thinking about, and I haven't gone on it, I probably should get on it soon, just organizing like a informal fun get together the day before the conference starts, and you all are invited. I just have to figure out how to invite you and let you know where to be. And then I would be happy to, introduce you to specific people. I'll be inviting the other like co-op developers and service providers that I know who are going to that conference to be there that night before, so that you can meet them and know what they're about before you go into the conference, and have some context when you see them, or see their name in the presenters thing, like, oh, I met Ricardo already. I would love to learn more from him about, work cooperatives or whatever. Ricardo Nunez. So there's that, and then I think Suparna will be there, and we're doing a presentation on. We're doing two. One on somatics and the co-op body, but also experience through our own bodies. So if you're into somatics, or kind of understanding the relationship between, what was mentioned earlier, just like, what are the emotions that we feel most comfortable in, right? But also, where do our different experiences manifest in our bodies? And understanding that when we're in conversation, we're in our co-op meetings, right, and something comes up, and understanding how something is feeling in our body as it relates to maybe some past experiences, and how do we help ourselves, but also work cooperatively to work through our collective traumas, as well as shared joys. So that's one session, and another one is on the San Diego co-op ecosystem. So much more about learning from other ecosystems that have supported cooperatives. So Zen Trenholm from Democracy at Work Institute will be there. One of the executive directors of the Democracy at Work Institute also lives in San Diego. Democracy at Work Institute does co-op development training for worker co-op developers. So they don't directly work with worker cooperatives, but their website is still helpful for resources on worker cooperatives. And I'm pretty sure Vanessa will be there. Vanessa Bransberg is in San Diego. But yeah, for the San Diego Co-op ecosystem, Sona will be there, Suparna, myself, and talking about what exists in San Diego, getting into the history of San Diego cooperatives, what's needed, and looking to Consuelo for policy help to create more resources within the county to support cooperative development, right? Because it's not just about people wanting to start up cooperatives. It's like you need these co-op developers, the CPAs, the lending institutions that will loan money to cooperatives, right? And so how can our city support that? And that's what we'll be going over in that session. I'm on a roll with naming upcoming workshops, so I'll just name 2 more. One this weekend, there's one run by a member of art.coop, and it's on solidarity economies. It's co-hosted by the POC fungi community. So solidarity economies is more like a lowercase c cooperative concept, right? It's like people working together to try to build up and maintain our abilities to connect and support each other in community, and not necessarily through strict financial means, right? So that's this weekend, and then there's another one that
May 7th with the City of San Diego. So for some of you, especially National City, Barrio, I think are all within the Promise Zone. So we can send out details on that. Danielle mentioned it, who was here with us earlier. May 7th in the evening.
Yeah, I'm involved. I'm on that subcommittee for that co-op conference, and they were, I think she's on your email. Melissa, I think they were talking about having it here. But June 1st, we're going to have an after mixer, I think, after the conference, and for all those people, really get a grasp on who we met, what we gonna do next, who we gotta go get, all that good stuff will be on June 1st and the evening after the conference. So we're working through all that. So there was a meeting today that I'll catch up with you. But I think it's gonna be really good. I get really lost because there's, like you said, there's a few right now. The city, the other one that you mentioned. So I'm just trying to get my head around all of them right now and figure out who's connected to what and where and all of those things. So I'm in the right place.
Pre-party, post-party.
Post-party.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could have the pre-party here as well as the post-party,
Oh,
and then
maybe both, yeah.
Cool. I'm all in.
Thank you. Okay, so those are some of the upcoming in-person
When
resources.
did you say the Solidarity Economies event was? Just this
27th. I'm not sure what time, but I will send it out. Yeah. And I think it's hosted with Food Shed, right, Jose?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's co-hosted with Food Shed and POC Fungi Community. I don't remember where it is though. Yeah, so those are some upcoming in-person resources. I am probably going to be very slow to responding to emails, but I will be here again May 24th for the producer cooperatives meeting or workshop and the co-op conference, and then also at the Alliance gathering in October. I think there'll be some co-op oriented sessions. But yeah, I'll follow up by email with some specific resources that help with startups. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. To keep your records, it should be in English or they can be in Spanish.
The initial ones or ongoing?
Yeah, because sometimes, when you have part of your team being Spanish speakers, the main language that is Spanish is because it's official documents and things like that. Or you need to have it in both languages.
I think it's, so there's going to be the difference between governance and operations ones. And so this is where you'll want to ask an attorney, but my experience of working with groups where not everybody works in English, the operations have been in the language that everyone understands and it's most useful. And then the governance documents still, they often are in all the languages that are applicable, but also needing to have it in English because of the sort of legal reasons of, if anything comes up and someone needs to review it, you want to make sure that there's that clear understanding of that language. So yeah. So when it comes to like meeting minutes, right? When you have a board and even the meeting is not conducted in English, what do you do then? I think that's a realm that is worth asking an attorney. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mai. Thank you. A wealth of knowledge and wisdom around cooperatives. So thank you so much for this. Thank you for the future gatherings. So Mai already planted the seeds, but there is another one that we're doing in this series, and this was Worker Cooperatives. So we'll do producer cooperatives, a workshop with Mai, and that will be next month. So we'll send you details on that. We'll send you all a follow-up email that has resources that Mai shares with us, and we'll pass along to you. And we'll also try to include all these events, upcoming events that were referenced. And then also just kind of, thank you for being here and showing up and really being able to hear the technical, and also the soft stuff, because it is that soft stuff that's going to actually seed and build the culture of cooperation in San Diego County. So when we're talking about building an ecosystem, we need money, yeah, we need policymakers, yeah, we need more co-ops, we need all those things. In order to do all those things, we need a culture of cooperation. So this right here was we were just living it. We were just living it for the past 6 hours. So thank you for being here and just modeling that, because I think it gives us some hope for the future. So thank you again, and more to come. We also have our annual gathering, which will be October 17th at the Center for the Arts in Escondido. And we haven't settled on the theme, but quite likely it will be around this idea of cooperation.
All right, thank you everyone. Thank you, Maya.